You should see the screen up there, should be the square of 9. And we're looking at the Nifty just to begin. Somebody requested it look at the Nifty. I'll look at a whole bunch of different markets today, don't worry. Now, I'm going to start from scratch, don't worry. I'm not going to just begin with what you're seeing here. But know that basically there's going to be some automatic tools used. We're using Optima, we're using GANTrader. It was sort of mentioned in the notes of all the webinars that of all of the webinars, this one is going to be heavily dependent on GANTrader. You'll notice though, I'm going to try to use some manual settings, manual tools within GANTrader just to so that you can realize this is possible in other forms of software. The square of 9 itself is just a swirl of numbers on a square, and it's a circle of numbers around there. There's many different forms of this square available out there. There's free software of the GAN square. There is many websites out there with a simplistic GAN square. And when it comes down to it, when you see what we're going to do today, it's not going to be impossible to do this manually, especially longer term. When you get down to the moon, as usual, manual work is difficult. It's fast, okay? It just means you're charting every day. So for the Nifty, we're going to be focusing on the natal date of the Indian independence. I'll pull up a web page real quick. Here we go. Got the Nifty. Oh, Independence Day is August 15th, 1947. Okay, why am I using that date? Because it's an index. I would say, here's a suggestion people have been asking me, how do I find natal dates? What do I use for natal dates? Especially for index and metals. I've mentioned about metals previously. You should probably use the beginning of a futures market, okay? The opening up, the first trade date of the futures market, especially the major one in the United States, okay? So for silver, we use a date in 1933. For gold, we use a date in 1974. I'll give you those dates. No big deal. It's pretty simplistic. It's just the date they were listed on the CME stock, or the CME futures markets, and those were those specific dates that hold relevance. But for a country and for its index of its banks, well, then you use the Independence Day. The country itself is defining the cycles within these bigger moves. Yes, you could probably also look into the beginning of the stock market, the day the stock market opened. But because this is actually a rather recent date, I would say it's a great date to use, first of all, because it means the cycles are, I've kind of mentioned it before that with IPOs and just anything that has a younger date, a younger start date, the cycles are a little more pure in a sense. And sometimes you might find that, later on, all the cycles get so mixed up, the long-term cycles and the short-term cycles, and it's hard to define, which one is the most important. But from the beginning and a shorter lifespan, not everything has really gone so far. Therefore, not so many cycles have started, and not so many long-term cycles, which might be hard to track, have started. Therefore, when you're using the planets, it's always a similar system. It's not hard to track the planets, but other kinds of cycles, like keeping track of years and things like this passing, well, that all becomes a little bit complicated. So, this is a good date to use for the Independence Day in India. I would use for the United States. You would use Independence Day for the United States, 1776. For Canada, we use Canada Day. So, whatever your most modern Independence Day, whenever the most modern government was set up, whatever the most modern banking system was set up, the most modern fiat system was set up, use that date. Also, we use in, like I showed you last week with the SPX, or sorry, the S&P, we use the Buttonwood Agreement, which is May 17th, 1792. And I'm going to show you a chart using that date a little later. So that's the first date of the NYSE. It's an esoteric date. It's a sort of weird date, but it's one that the markets commonly use. So we use it. So I'm kind of showing you, yes, there are some very set in stone rules you might use towards finding natal dates and beginning dates, but also there might be a little bit of fun or creative ways to go about this as well. Or also if you know how to dig into astrology, digging into natal dates, reading of planets from different perspectives and interpretations, well, you're more than welcome to do that. I personally do not focus on that. I focus on price movements relatable to the degree movements of planets. Sort of a different perspective. It's more in line with Gann, numerology, and the other side, or the geometry of astrology or astronomy, okay? Doesn't really deal with the esoteric side of astrology so much. That doesn't mean I don't think it's valid or important. I think if you're able to pull information from it, you should use it, okay? I'm going to show a very simplistic point of view, why I might use a certain few planets when we look at these things today. I think people have wondered that, so I'm going to do a little bit of that. And so hopefully I put this all together in a coherent way for you today. So using the Independence Day, 1947, that's good. But just before we jump in on the chart, it's quite simplistic, just a little point of view of what the square of 9 is. The square of 9 is a pyramid. It is a pyramid of numbers. In a sense, you're looking at the tip of the pyramid from the center, and you're looking at the base of the pyramid on the outside. It's a lot like a pyramid if you look at it like this. We're up at the tip at number 1 here, and the base here down at the bottom, okay, all the way around 360, is this outer rim, okay? And what we've got here is 9 rows, because 9 rows makes about 360 numbers, okay? If you want, once you spiral out in the numbers. I don't want to get too deep into the structure of the square of 9, the numerology of the square of 9, any more than just telling you this is a pyramid and this is why this kind of math, this numerology exists within the markets, in my opinion. It works around the square of 9, therefore, you know, you've got this system of a square and a circle around that square, cycles within cycles. It's just perfect for what we do with the markets. Now, you can probably watch a million different things on YouTube about all the special things that you could find out about. But if you find a good one on how to trade with it, you let me know. So I'm going to get into that. Just another perspective is, you know, that you're setting up this circle also. And in some way, it's almost like you're setting this as a pyramid on the earth. And just taking an example, so I have that pyramid up here. Sorry. Pyramid, there we go. So the pyramid of Egypt sits at this, this latitude here. And it's as if we placed the square of 9 on this point of the earth, and this 0 degrees of this circle here is this line running across all the way around the earth. And then you've got your north, your south, your east, and your west, or your west and your east, sorry, west, east, going around the earth. It's just a really natural thing. Okay, it's nothing more than something that was discovered in ancient art, ancient books on mathematics. You know, these kinds of geometric tools were used to build architecture. Pretty amazing. Okay, now the idea that it was used to build, though, I mean, that's kind of indicative of what we do with the markets. And in some way, this might be a good metaphorical connection there, but truly all of that's interesting. But I don't even want to look at the fact that there's numbers that work within the pyramids. It's not interesting. I'm not interested in telling you that, because there's many other sources on that information, and you know, it's not going to help you trade, in my opinion. So let's get into this here. We're going to look at the Nifty. The Nifty Banks, I guess this index, it kind of has a start date, not the same as the Independence Day. It's, oh, here we go, year 2000, a base date of January 1st, 2000. September 15th, 2003 was the first launch, I suppose the first trade date. So you could, especially if you were trading fast cycles, the moon, even on a daily chart, I would say, you might want to pop in these other cycles. And we'll take a look at these cycles too. But I'm going to show you with the square of 9 for the biggest moves on a monthly chart, using Independence Day and how we can define the growth of the country's banks, in a sense, with the square of 9, just with the movement of the Helio-Saturn, okay? So here we go into square of 9. I'm going to knock out some of these tools here, and then we'll get into it. And so, like we begin with the wheels, the ephemeris, when we were dealing with the planets before we started drawing degrees onto the chart, it's always the same thing, but with the square of 9, the geometry is different. You can see immediately that the numbers aren't in a linear fashion. Each row has a different amount of numbers. Therefore, as we get higher in our numbers, they begin to spiral out. This is a spiral graph. Gann actually called his square of 9 a spiral graph. Okay. Now, this kind of tells you something very specific. Number one, each one of these rings is also a circle in a sense. Each one of these squares is a circle in a sense divided by 360 degrees by this outer ring. So this circle here, even though it's just 1 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, or dollars maybe, if you were dealing with it that way, or time, days, if you were dealing with it that way, each square is also 360 degrees. If you've dealt with the wheel of 24, it's the same concept. Each ring of the wheel of 24 is 24 degrees, but it's also 360 degrees. But when you build the wheel of 24 onto your chart, it doesn't grow in size every ring of 360 degrees. And that's what happens with your wheel of, with your square of 9, and that should tell you something about it. It kind of defines growth. It spirals out, and that is sort of our natural, you know, the spiral is our natural growth feature on the market. So it can kind of define and connect moments way up in value to lower moments of price, because, you know, it's connected in a special geometric way. And well, that geometric way is actually this spiraling out on this, you know, on this system of numbers you see here. So what we're going to start with is this. I'm actually going to knock off the price as well, because I want to prove to you, we don't need to see the price. We can technically pull information from this chart that is relevant without even knowing the price, where we really began or ended. Really, the natal date isn't so important even at this point, but I will show you the natal date from an astrological perspective in the most simple way, just before we begin laying anything on the chart. I've got here 8:15, 1947, 12 a.m. on my ephemeris. Heliocentric planet set on my chart. Heliocentric. I'm going to set it to 4:30. I think that's the GMT offset for India. But anyways, it doesn't truly matter unless we're looking at the exact decimals, okay? Right, yeah. And so by changing it, sorry, just want to make sure, I want to see what changed when I changed it from UTC. Yeah, I mean, just the decimals, okay? The smallest forms of the geometry, you might want to be more precise, know the exact time zone if you're going to be using the moon, okay? Or the sun, truly, if you're trading high leverage and you need decimal places, okay? So when we look at this chart immediately, without any kind of true astrological knowledge, maybe we have a simplistic point of view from our previous webinars. We know what an aspect is. We know how it's an angular relationship around this chart. So we know that these relationships that are being pointed out by these lines are just the angular relationship being pointed out, and the particular ones that are important, the ones related to splitting up this circle in those special ways, dividing it by 4, dividing it by 5, dividing it by 6, dividing it by whatever portion you'd like, creating those what they might call sacred geometries onto the circle, or just, you know, standard shapes on the circle, stars, triangles, squares. Sorry, got a little thing in my throat here. So let's take a look at this chart. It's quite an amazing chart. It's heliocentric, so I mean, it's not really, that's not really a classic astrological point of view. We would normally look at maybe the geocentric planets, and I would, don't question, but I want to start with the heliocentric planets. One, they're easy to chart, and there's no retrograde cycle to worry about, and they are really good for long-term analysis. And honestly, I think that they are good for defining long-term growth. Heliocentric Saturn, why would I use heliocentric Saturn in this chart? Well, I mean, I might also use Pluto, I might also use Venus. They're all heliocentric, obviously. And obviously, Mars being quintile, like we talked about the quintiles being very important. Mars is quintile to Saturn and Pluto. I mean, this chart is pretty amazing when you think about it in the terms of just a few simple things that we have discussed, okay? So immediately, I mean, I know that it's not really the most classic way to approach a natal chart. The aspects are almost seen as, by some astrologers, as a really weak perspective to take on a natal chart. But honestly, I think that for our purposes, this is what we're trying to do. We're just trying to find a reason to use one or two particular cycles to begin with, because truly most of the planets and most of the cycles will work for us. We just need to find a reason why we might use one or another. I know that seems a little bit strange, but it's kind of like all of these things playing out on different time frames, and I'm sure you've gotten to the point where you've drawn a million Gann boxes and a million fans on your charts, well, tens or 20s of fans, 10s, 20 of boxes, and it just gets so crazy with lines. And it all is kind of working. They're all showing support and resistance, and they're all kind of helping you, but it's impossible to interpret what's going on, especially with the prediction of the trading. That's a lot like using all of the planets. If you start using all of the planets and all of the aspects, it's going to work for you in a weird way. You could start laying down all of the planets and all of these tiny little harmonics of the planets, and truly you might find a really great system of just buying and selling off of those lines. It's possible. I've seen it being done. But the specific information available here will let you simplify your search. Boom, Jupiter and Mars. Well, I mean, Jupiter and Mars is a pretty classic example regardless, but we use it. So we use it for the nifty. And let's use Helio-Saturn as well. Why? Because Pluto is basically conjunct with it. Venus is basically conjunct with it. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. And also, quintile to Mars. That's a powerful thing. So you might want to use Mars and Saturn. But just to begin with, the idea that Saturn is a hot planet here. And also I like Saturn. Saturn is also here, in Leo. You could look into this stuff. It might be something interesting to you, the astrological meaning of it all. But, Saturn is also a classic planet to begin with, especially in contrast to Jupiter. The cycles are perfect for long-term analysis. Faster cycle on top of that would be Mars. When we're looking for cycles to trade with, we're literally looking for the cycle we're relating to our time frame of trading. So if we're looking to trade long-term, buy 10 years and 10 years from now sell for a profit, look to Saturn, look to Jupiter. If we're looking, you could find some smaller cycles within there as well. But if we're looking to trade every day, even Mars might be a little too slow for everyday trading. We might need to look at the sun and the moon. They move faster. Okay. So I hope that helps, because I did get a lot of those kinds of questions about, what cycle to use. Just hope that, we can move on from that and you start experimenting. Use the ones I'm showing you. Okay. So just also going back, before I get into the circle, the way you see an ephemeris set up on the chart, I mean, seeing this 90 up here, 180, 270 at the bottom, truly, I guess an astrological ephemeris would be set up with 0 here. Oops, let's lock that to 0. 0 here on the left, and 90 should be at the bottom, 180, 270 at the top. This is sort of the classic way to see an actual astrological ephemeris. when I'm using the Gann wheels, I actually use a different setup. I've seen people say that this is sort of like a controversial thing. I would say that try not to get too wrapped up in those kinds of things. Just realize that the circle math doesn't matter. How it sits here, especially on just this ephemeris, doesn't matter if it's upside down or right side up, the circle math is working. They're always in the same relationships with each other on this circle. And then if I move over to the wheel here, and you'll see here I've got my ephemeris, the outer wheel is just the same exact 0 to 360, but I'm actually going up here, 0 to 90 to 180, down to 270. And I've got my numbers here. They're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, they're going in this direction here. In Optima, they call that direction clockwise. I don't really know. You know, it's hard to describe all this stuff. As long as all of your things are aligned together properly. So in this software here, we've got this clockwise setting. So if I'm looking at my wheel, everything is set to clockwise, and everything is starting from the west where 0 is. Okay. I actually, when I'm using my wheel of 24, I naturally actually set it up opposite, and that's just because I learned from somebody who used it that way. But the geometry is exactly the same, obviously, across the wheel. But in the square of 9, you kind of get this more inner-outer connection between the sort of the outer wheel and the inner wheel have a connection, and the direction is important. So they should just all be aligned the same way. So the way you see I have it set up here, it's also similar to the way that Gann set it up on his spiral graph that he shared. So, you know, this is the way I would use it. I guess it's enough on that. So from here, we'll finally get to start charting, guys. What we're going to do, we're going to focus on just heliocentric Saturn. And what we're doing with the square, first of all, realize this. I'm not making any connection to price yet. I'm just looking at time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the planets moving in the sky, and we're going to count the degrees. First of all, we're going to be just watching them in the sky where their positions are, and then we're going to start counting the degrees from the birth date, the Independence Day. Okay. But to begin with, without any price up there, I'm going to just start laying the position of Saturn, the heliocentric Saturn, or the time of heliocentric Saturn's when it passes a particular position. I just want to get rid of all the planets on here except for Saturn. Just want Saturn. So we've just got Saturn there, and you see Saturn on the outer ring. It should be somewhere. Do I not see it here? 300. I've been having a few issues with Optima, let's say. So I can't show my price on my wheel. They've got some updates recently, so it's not a huge deal. Okay. I'm not going to run into any big issues with that. Oh, there we are. There's our Saturn. Okay. Okay. So if I go back to 0, you see Saturn goes back to 0 in the center of that circle. Okay. So what I'm going to do, if I look at this square, even without all of the rainbow colors, okay, let's see if I can just get rid of those just for now. Whoops. Just going to get rid of my overlays just for now. Don't forget about those. And what I want to do is I want to look at just actually what would 0 degrees be? Because if this is 0 degrees here, then all of these these numbers within here are technically 0 degrees of the square. Okay, if that's 0 degrees of the circle, then all of the numbers that are within this outer ring here, or in this ring here, this ring here, and this would go inwards. Okay, if any of those rings, this position here is 0 degrees. Okay, and you can see that both of the circles are aligned now. Okay, the inner circle gives me different information than the outer circle. I'm going to tell you what that is soon. Okay. You can see you have your astrological symbols here as well, and they're just going up with the degrees as they would. Okay. Now it's an ephemeris on the outside, almost exactly the same as what we've got here. Okay. The center is also an ephemeris. but the numbers are going to be spiraling outwards like I showed you. So if Saturn is at 1 degrees, well, it's at 1 degrees in the center here, and then it goes outwards, and once it hits 360 degrees here, it goes back to the beginning. And now, because this is the square of 9, we get 361 at the end of this. Okay? It's just an extra number that fits, and truly that's just a transitional point, and it's often a powerful moment. Okay? So what we're going to look at is this 0 degree point. Obviously, I already brought that up, but what I want to know is, when does heliocentric Saturn cross 0 degrees of the square of 9? So it's not 0 degrees of the entire ephemeris. It's this time that's basically whenever it's at 2 degrees, whenever it's at 11 degrees, whenever it's at 28 degrees. Let's zoom in there. 1, 2, 11, 28, 53, 86. So those are some special numbers there. Really special numbers, really, okay? So if we kind of watch this character here, and you're in Optima, you can do this yourself by putting your, setting your groups to yellow or whatever color you'd like. As long as your charts are all grouped together, you'll get this line on your chart, and that is truly the date of the ephemeris on my square of 9. And if I start to drag this line, you'll see that Saturn starts to move, and it starts to go up the chart, in a sense, around here, down the pyramid, I suppose you can say it like that, but it doesn't really mean anything about up or down direction in price. It just means that heliocentric Saturn is moving up in the ephemeris, and that is its actual degree. And so when we start this chart back in 2000, which is when the contract and trading began on this contract, heliocentric Saturn was down here. So let's just see when the first time it kind of came up above him. Okay, 86 degrees. I'm going to mark that with a horizontal line. Oops, horizontal, what am I saying? Vertical line. Messing myself up here. Vertical line. Now, it's best to be precise, but let's just, for time's sake, let's just plop it down as close as I can get it. You can mark it, maybe make it a bright color. I like orange for Saturn things. And, let's get the date shown on there as well. So there's our date. Might be not the exact date. Remember, this is a monthly chart. So there might be an exact date when a heliocentric Saturn hit 86 degrees exactly. Well, there is an exact day. You can find that if you'd like. Okay, but this is good enough for us. So we'll move on. Now I'm just going to let Saturn go all the way around again, and it hits 127. Now, obviously, I can just go into a piece of software and say, "Oh, show me when Saturn hits all of these marks." But if you were using a free online version of this square and you were plotting Saturn manually, you might do it this way. And well, I mean, this is a little bit easier than that, but it shows you how you can do it manually. So let's do it this way. So I'll just copy my my vertical line, and I'll put it here when Saturn's at 127. And we'll move on, pull it up when it's at 176. Okay. Copy, get that date to ourselves, move on, move up. Saturn's at 233. You can see we're in 2014 now. Quite a bit of time passing already, right? So you realize this is for long-term analysis. Copy tool, place it down. Now you've got, let's move in here all the way around to 98. Copy tool, place it. Right, 2020. Now, if we go around one more time, what happens? Saturn has gone all the way around the chart and ends up back at 1. Okay, so technically it hit 361 here and went back to 1. Okay, now technically this is a major moment in a sense, but that's in the future. Okay, and we can't really see too far back in the past because this contract, based on the Independence Day, it doesn't go back that far, the trading on this particular schedule, on this particular chart. So you know, this is a particularly strong moment coming in the future, but we can't really look at that in the past, but we'll look at other moments like that on other charts. But this is pretty good enough for us right now, okay? I just wanted to see all of the moments in the past when this might have happened. And, you know, since we're already looking at it this way and we're kind of pulling numbers off of this chart, well, if I were to lay down my tool here, I've got something called static square of 9. So I can actually just pull a fresh one up, static square of 9. And I can just pull it here from any position, and I just pull it over in time, and it fills it up. I know that looks a little crazy right now, so let's just ignore that. I'm going to set it up so all I see is just the 360 line for now, okay? And I'm going to make it white, and I'm going to make it faded, so it's not so bright. There we go. That should be it. Now, if I look at the scale here, it's set to 10. If I look down here and I look at all the numbers and the prices that come up, now somebody who's already familiar with the square might find this just as arbitrary information. It's true, it's just regular old square information, but you can see the numbers here as it's going up. If it's set to 10, well, let's set it to 1 to begin with, just to make it simple. This is going to be simple for people who have already been here and have been dealing with price unit ratios before. You've got here $11. Well, that's 360 degrees. So from 0 degrees, let me get rid of that crosshair. From 0 degrees, you're up here to $11. That is 360 degrees. So once it's gone around the first ring here, at $9, it exits to the next ring, and then 0 degrees of the ring is 11. That means that's 360 degrees. And you can see there, 28, 53, 86, 27, 28, 53, 86, 127, 176. All these numbers here are the 360 degree points. So obviously, if I take this tool and I start breaking it down more, what it's doing is it's taking any one of these rings in price and breaking them up into the segments of this square. So if I were to say, okay, I want to see 180 degrees. Well, now it's showing me, let's differentiate those a little bit. Let's get that a little brighter, the 360 line. And so every time it crosses 180 degrees, that's these numbers over here, because that's the 180 of the circle. If you've got 0 over here, well, that's 180 over here. Let me show you how that will look on our inner ring. If I were to choose the number over here on the other side of the ring, whoops, there we go. You can see that this inner ring has switched to 0, right? And that's showing you that it's 180 degrees from its original position. Okay. So the inner ring is kind of showing you what's your selection and how far is it from your original position. Now, hopefully that makes sense to you because that tool comes in handy. All right. But we'll get into it and you'll see it in use. Okay, remember the price isn't even there yet. So, I mean, the only thing that we're going to have to realize is that, yes, I'm laying this down on a naked chart. Yes, I don't have the price there, but if the price is sitting up at $10,000, well, a $371 tool or a chart set to $371 isn't going to help us very much. Okay, I'm sure you realize that already. We'll have to increase our ratio. And I'll show you how to kind of go about a process for that. But from here, we want to move just to the idea that what we're seeing is these numbers being a price also. And as it moves up in price, okay, you're actually getting these positions plotted, and they refer to the 360 degree divisions that you see going on the circle here. Okay. It's kind of a real 3D thing going on here. You're taking this square and you're drawing it down onto the circle. And we're now marking off when heliocentric Saturn is crossing these points. These points here. You could also point then also when it crosses those other points in between. But you realize, I think now, hopefully, is that since this is a 360 degree cycle that you're seeing here, right? Whenever you split up a cycle of time, you could actually use your standard cycle time breakdown tools. So we have our simple Fibonacci breakdown tools, you know, these kinds of things. But we can just proportion any period of time. And truly, well, I've kind of tried to reinforce the example that degrees and percentages, especially when you're dealing with the markets, are essentially the same thing. Well, 50%. If these are moments here, if this date here was a date that heliocentric Saturn crossed 0 degrees of the square, and then the next time it did it is over here at this next point, then the 50% mark is 180 degrees. In a sense, the moment that heliocentric Saturn has crossed the 180 degree mark of the circle. And that, therefore, if you want to break down any angle, you could just get the percentage of that angle in the circle and apply it to this cycle. Okay, so that's basically splitting up our tinier Saturn cycles where they're going around each ring, and we're shrinking them even further. We're getting sort of fractals within there, and not fractals, harmonics within there, and seeing these proportions. Okay, but remember, there are degrees and percentages and dates. So I hope you realize too here, it's kind of not, well, I mean, it is a little bit obvious to me anyways, that this is expanding, right? We're having an expansion of time here. Every time it crosses 0 degrees, it's a little bit further away from the last time. And it grows and grows and grows, okay? And technically, yes, there is more rows than 9 rows on the square of 9. We could kind of go forever here. And if you're the kind of trader or the kind of guy that, or kind of person that looks at this chart and thinks, well, obviously, heliocentric Saturn goes around this 360 degrees, and each one of these rings in itself is 360 degrees, then any place Saturn is, let's pull it around to when Saturn is maybe at a higher ring at this corner here. Well, if I take a selection tool here, any price that is within this line here that you see me drawing is also relatable to heliocentric Saturn's position. So the degree of heliocentric Saturn this day is 209 degrees, whatever the day is, just looking at an arbitrary day here. But it's also within the ring of 360 degrees from 0 degrees being this row, right? It's also somewhere around 215 degrees, close in price, but that's just a coincidence. Now, every single other point within every other ring that refers to the, well, or that is within this line is also 215 degrees. Therefore, each stack of these lines, technically, if I just take this point here, on this very day, technically Saturn is at 215 degrees of this ring, right? And if I plop that down, make it orange and solid there. So that's the actual position this day. Now, we don't really want to track this particular day, so I won't use that line. But you understand it's creating a horizontal line out of that degree. And if you remember me using horizontal lines to define natal positions of planets, well, this you can see is kind of very much related, okay? So let's get rid of that 215 just because we don't need it right now. What we're gonna do now, we're gonna actually put down the price. But I think that obviously, just we're in advanced class now, I'm just gonna move this to $10 because you realize we're already working in a higher price range than this small range, and we're over $371. In a sense, that should immediately be a trigger for you, at least, that if you've broken out of the last ring, the 360 degree ring of the square of 9, the 9th ring, okay? Well, let's actually look at that. When we're looking at the price, if I had my price set to $1 per degree, my price unit set to $1 per degree on my static wheel, and I only set it to 9 revolutions, and I try to find, well, where's the price? Let's put that price down. Now, without looking at any of this stuff too deeply just yet, realize why would I use $1 per degree for this market? Obviously, one full cycle of planets is not fitting within here. In a sense, this is not 360 degrees of price, a full planetary system being 360 degrees of price. So even though we've got 360-degree rings here, the entire system is this stack of 9 rings, and that equals 360 full degrees. And so if 360 degrees or 9 rings is not enough to fill your chart and capture all of your planetary degrees or your price for your planetary degrees, what we'll do is we'll just go up by 10. Yes, we'll get into a couple more or a couple different price units later, and we'll use volume a little bit, but let's just go up by 10 at first, especially on this long-term analysis. $1 per degree isn't good enough. Let's go to 10. Let's make sure we're only at 9 revolutions. The software tries to fit it automatically. Well, you can see that originally the market was fitting within those pretty well. Okay. Now you can see obviously that was a great day there to choose, but let's just not focus on that right now. Knowing this is sort of our next level of 360 degrees, 3710, right? This is our ninth full revolution of 360 degrees, meaning, you know, there's your numbers, 1 to 11, 28, all the way to 298. And yeah, if I add the 10th row, it'll show me here, sorry, if I add the 10th row on my ring, it'll show me that last bit of the ring enough to get to 371. Okay, so technically, after a planet crosses 360 degrees, it goes back to 1. But there is this little section here of price of this outer ring that the cycles are sort of out of match, right? You've got 360 degrees ending here, and then it jumps up 1 more ring and goes up 11 more degrees to 371, or from 360 to 371 is 11 degrees, which is the last 0 degree of this ring. And yeah, it would continue on in price if you worked that way. But technically, I'm saying to you, there's a good way of looking at your actual price, the current price that the market's sitting in, and choosing the ratio that fits within 9 rings. And that's kind of giving you a little bit of a special information there. Once it's broken out of 9 rings, or gets to its 10th ring, then you're sort of in a new paradigm for that market. Let's look at that now. We've already moved out of 9 rings of $10 per degree. So let's go up, and we'll go to $100 per degree. And we'll show 9 rings. Well, look at that. That fits really well right now where the price is. And the biggest moves are being well contained, and a lot of support and resistance levels are being found here. There isn't some exactness to any of this, but I'm going to find it. I'm going to show you how you can get a little more exact here. But just generally, what we're looking for here is this. I laid down the moments when heliocentric Saturn crossed 0 degrees of the square. Not even related to the natal date. This is just from when the market opened, each time after that heliocentric Saturn crossed any of these numbers on the wheel here that you see on this 0 degree mark, right? 0 degrees. And take a look at this. As we have our first date come in here, we break over a level of 360 degrees. That would be $11 down here. Let's take a look here. Let's see if we can see some sort of connection to where heliocentric Saturn is and the price that comes up. Well, if you notice here that at this moment, as heliocentric Saturn crosses the number 11, right, we're getting a breakout up to the next level of 360 degrees immediately, up to basically 2800. Well, on this day, you know, normally, if heliocentric Saturn was at 11 degrees with the price here, we might not expect too much movement. It would almost be like the market is balanced. Because at this moment, heliocentric Saturn is actually this is the first time that this has happened for this market after it started trading. We have heliocentric Saturn breaking into a new ring of its own, and therefore the price being completely, in a sense, undervalued in comparison to the position of heliocentric Saturn. How do we know that? Well, look how many rows up it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, so that means that we're up 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, 5 is up here. Okay. So we get there in a couple of rings, but it takes a long time. This is years passing. So it's not like some instantaneous jump to that ring, but it is kind of telling you something about direction here. Okay. If you were looking for something to move downward in some way, you're looking towards something that's in a lower ring happening, and therefore maybe we move towards that position if price is above that ring. So it's quite powerful here in the sense of like, which direction are we going here because of some sort of planetary event? Well, in some sense, this is telling you, if the planet that you're dealing with is far above us, we're moving up into it. And if it's low below us in price, as in a different ring, if say the price is up here at 233, the relative level of, 23,000 here, well, maybe heliocentric Saturn is going to pull us down if it's down here at about 53 or 86. And this is only one event that I'm referring to here. Just the event of heliocentric Saturn, not when it crosses 0 degrees Aries, not when it crosses a particular point in the ephemeris, when it crosses these geometrically perfect, let's say, points. Okay. And each time it crosses one of those points, not only do we get that reaction in a sense, maybe the squaring out, the idea that it moves towards the planet, but but basically every time that happens, we're sort of moving to a new level. That's sort of a point at which we can see, at least sometimes, that it's going to be a defining moment when the price will jump to a brand new level that it has never jumped to before. And if we take a look here, you're kind of having that happen. We're getting a little bit here. We're getting a jump into the next level here, right? It's already happened here a bit, but then by the next block, which would have been when this level was being activated. And we're here now. And then we come in here, we're here now in this level. And then we come up here, and we've entered into some new level here, okay? Which this would be the box that we should be in here. It's jumped well above, but the next box would be this one, and you can see the price has kind of returned. Now, I'm not saying that that's a perfect system. It's not something that's going to happen perfectly, but that would be the one-by-one movement through the box, perfectly in sync with heliocentric Saturn. Now, it's working quite well, especially on this monthly. So you are getting the power of it, I hope. You're seeing that connection. You're seeing this idea of like, why does something go logarithmic or parabolic in price? Or how can we track that movement with planets? If planets only move 360 degrees linearly and they don't sort of expand in the same way that we see price doing, especially in a market that's growing and expanding in this manner, well, this is the way we can define it, by the way planets move through the square. And when they cross specific moments, they bring us to new levels. And you could sort of estimate or guess, based on how far a planet has traveled since birth, how far up this scale it should go. Now, it's always going to be relative to a ratio, and I hope that you realize that when I say these things, ratio is not something simple to deal with. We've dealt with it with volume a little bit throughout the webinar. I'm going to go through it a little bit again with volume later. Okay, so if we're dealing with something here that's set to $100 per unit, yeah, that's going to work quite well, especially for the Nifty, especially for an index stock that works with where it's not going to change so often because the index stock has very consistent volume, right? This kind of thing. The ratio might fluctuate a lot more on a stock or a cryptocurrency, sometimes we might just use the biggest geometry and it will kind of hold everything together anyways, but you're not going to get those little in-between moments. And just as an example, if I were to go down to a daily chart, well, let's just take a look real quick. I'm not going to mess with my settings too much, but going down to a daily chart here, you get some good detail, right? But you're not seeing the bigger structures defining every move here for yourself. And if you were trading this on a daily, well, if you were to buy here thinking, okay, this is Saturn, it's going to move to a new level. Okay, then it moves to a new level and then it drops down and then it moves up eventually. Well, that's great news in the end, but it was very difficult to trade. So to define these smaller movements in between, we would use smaller ratio settings, and we might use faster cycles, different planets, not necessarily heliocentric Saturn for that. But if I'm trading very long term and looking at a monthly chart and looking literally at the entire cycle of the market, well, this is the way you do it. These are what you're looking for, these kind of incremental movements that are very much matched to a planet that's moving. And you're entering new levels of 360 degrees as this cycles outward. And you can look at it a lot like some sort of cycling and building up of speed and therefore momentum and therefore getting bigger price movements and maybe even expanding at points, again, with volume, where this point here might be defined much better by a bigger set of geometry even. I'm not saying to jump beyond $100 per degree right now. I'm saying it fits nicely within this structure, don't get me wrong. But, $200, maybe it makes a better movement just within here that's easier to define with the ways that I'm going to show you, maybe pulling some price ideas from the square as well. But just looking at this, you're seeing long-term big price movements, changes being defined before I even looked at the price, right? And then in the end, yes, I had to know the price range, but all I did was use that technique of, does it fit within 9 rings of the square of 9? Well, then maybe especially for the biggest movements, whatever structure that it does fit in, that's the one we're going to use, at least to define the biggest movements, as I say. And the biggest movements, well, hopefully you realized from previous webinars, or also just your own studies, the biggest movements are related to the biggest time frames, the biggest time cycles. So if you're dealing with a monthly chart, well, and you're counting monthly bars like we'll do tomorrow, that's powerful. That's a very powerful cycle. But also heliocentric Saturn, that's a long-term cycle. It's an outer planet, 20 plus years, 30 plus years, depending on if you're geocentric, heliocentric. And you head out to the outer planets, they get really long, hundreds of years. Obviously, those cycles are most important, but they're not easiest to trade, and they're not as evident, and they're not as easy to define. And maybe their ebb and flow is so wide and so broad that they don't really lend themselves to trading. So yeah, Pluto is a long cycle. You'd say, okay, well, that's the longest cycle. And there's outer planets. There's even, especially when you're looking scientifically and heliocentrically, technically there's outer planets beyond Pluto. Well, should we be using those? Those are different types of time cycles. Well, it just gets longer and longer, and you don't need to go that long, and it's going to be almost impossible to trade. It's going to be impossible amounts of time. Even this amount of time is a little bit much for day-to-day trading. The levels are good to keep an eye on, but that's all you would use this chart for, okay? But there's other things you can do with the same information to get in a little closer, right? So this, I'm telling you, is a great way to define this passage through the square and define longer term growth. But there's other things we can do to help us define that to ourselves as well, graphically. So what I'm going to do from natal date, first of all, I want to see a couple things. Additionally, I can see my natal transits. And since we're looking at heliocentric Saturn, I can look at those transits. We'll just set it up here. Remember with the circle and the square, the circle and the star that I gave you in your first webinar. This is basically just watching for heliocentric Saturn to go around the ephemeris and all of the relationships it makes to its own position, where it was on the natal date for the Nifty, which again, I told you was 5/18, oops, 5/18/1947. It's actually at midnight a.m. and I think it's 4:30 again. I said, you know, for those longer term cycles, the exact time frame or a time zone doesn't matter, or exact GMT offset, but you know, you should use it, especially if you're going to use the moon. Now, if I look at these should define some other movements for me. Not only should I be seeing turns, I should also be maybe seeing connections within this structure to the natal date, or sorry, the natal position of Saturn. And so let's just take a look here at the ephemeris. Our natal position was 132.47. Let's take a look here. Actually, I can just get that natal position by looking at my heliocentric position here. And I've got an ephemeris here, right? So I can just use the square of 9 as an ephemeris. So let's set that up here. I'll go to 8/15/1947 and 12 midnight. Okay. Now, that's your natal chart. In a sense, if I just started laying down all these, this is a special natal chart because it's on the square of 9, but there's all of your planets, their positions in the ephemeris, and you can get aspects and things like that from here as well by making manual calculations. It's not going to show you them here. But that's, you know, essentially, if you just are looking for the longitude, well, you've got it here. And what I want to do is actually just take the position of heliocentric Saturn, and I'm going to double click on it. I want to mark it in time forever for myself there. Okay, so my 847, 132, and we're at 132 there as well. Okay, you can actually see it. Now just take a look here. Again, this is a natal date, so it's set to that back date in 1947. Nothing really to do for our trading benefit here. But if I take this line here and I move it out to the outer ring, that line, that ring that's within 360 degrees onto the 9th ring, I'm going to remove the 10th ring just to make it simple. And let's take a look at the alignments that we see on this. Okay, it's pretty powerful, really. You know, you've got a lot of things going on here. Let me actually relay my overlays back on, because those do help us define these things. Maybe it's a little bit too bright there. There we go. And so you've got heliocentric Saturn. Let me click on that. We've already clicked on this row here. So I'm set to this alignment. And now look, you've got basically around this moment, you've got Jupiter coming in there at the exact moment. So we noticed all the combinations on the regular ephemeris. But now let's see what they look like on this square. We can see the alignment here of Venus. It's basically making a perfect sort of 30-degree relationship. And you can see Mars just about to make a 30-degree relationship here. Pluto is basically conjunct 1 degree. Okay. You've got Neptune here making basically a 45-degree relationship. Earth, remember this is heliocentric, so Earth is there, okay, technically, basically quintile, right? Basically quintile. So remember we were looking at those other aspects. Those are sort of different than our aspects that we're looking at now. These are not the same, right? So these kinds of connections are going to play out. But I would not want to get too complicated. You want to see a million different combinations? Well, go ahead. I mean, it's powerful to see these moments when everything aligns, and that's something very powerful. Maybe they all align on 0 degrees. They all align on a natal planet's line. Those are powerful moments, but they're rare, okay? But to know that on the natal date, there's also quite a few alignments to heliocentric Saturn on the square. But it is evident to you, I hope, that in a sense, that is because of all the relationships that are here, where you've got heliocentric Saturn. It's kind of all tied up here with Venus and Pluto and Saturn all together. Well, they're basically all together right there. This makes it sort of like a powerful moment to start from. Okay, that's all you're getting from that. Hopefully you realize that when things align on a square or an ephemeris or anything, that means that cycles are coming together. So if you see people charting cycles with those sort of half circle lines and charting line after line of cycles. I've done lots of charting like that. Oh, maybe I did mess up my transits. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I got 528 there. Let's see. 528, 18. Let's see. Oh, 2947. Wow. Let's see. There we go. That's better. All right. Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so these charts, I brought this up, the natal movement, because technically we're going to look at that as a way of tracing the 360-degree cycles within the full amount of cycles that this planet has traveled. So if you realize that a conjunction means that heliocentric Saturn, okay, from 5/18/1947 on this date is conjunct to its original position on that date. So it's actually traveled 360 degrees around the ephemeris and ended up in the same exact spot. Now, if I were to take this tool here, I've got a Gann counting tool, they call it in this software. It's just counting here, okay? I've got here, it's counting heliocentric Saturn movements since, let's make sure it's set to the right date, 8/15/1947. Okay. So this is counting that heliocentric Saturn has moved 960 degrees or so from natal date to the date, this day. So we're going to use that number too. But what you also realize is this position right here, when it comes to this 0 degrees of heliocentric Saturn, well, that's not just the first cycle of heliocentric Saturn that has passed. Heliocentric Saturn has gone around a few times, and it's probably its third time now starting, right? Since 960, divided by 3, it has gone 360 degrees 2 full times, and it's on its way to its third cycle. So it's about there where its third cycle will end, where it goes all the way up and through the ephemeris. So you realize that we're kind of catching on to this cycle at a later time. Therefore, if I start laying down things like my planetary fans like we've done before, well, I hope that you realize you could use those things all together here. And what does a planetary fan do? We've done that. We laid down in one of our first webinars a planetary fan of heliocentric Saturn, basically set to a line where we just matched the point in time where it crossed 0 degrees and a point in time in the future where it crossed 0 degrees, and we just drew that straight line, and that is literally the path in price of heliocentric Saturn. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. And what's that going to do? Well, that's defining the movement of the price of Saturn up and through 360 degrees of price, and relating it to how far it's traveled currently. And you'll see a good connection to the price, obviously, but also that's telling you something about, where it is currently in the ring as well, what ring that it's sitting within. So I take my trend line, just put it anywhere, okay? I'll make it a little thicker so you can see it. Let's make it orange. I like Saturn to be orange, remember? Now, set one coordinate, white back to $0, and I'm going to set it to, remember, this is the natal date, and we're going to count how many degrees natal Saturn has traveled since natal date. Or sorry, yeah, heliocentric Saturn has traveled since the natal date. So let's punch in the natal date of 8/15/1947, 12 midnight. Okay. And now, well, we've got the next pivot point, okay? We could make a square and figure out a perfect 45-degree angle, a 1x1, and set it to the speed of Saturn. But basically, with this information right here, we've got enough information to know the exact position of Saturn along the way through this cycle, because we've got the date of this basically this bar, and we've got how many degrees from natal date that Saturn has traveled. Well, if we're starting at $0, and in this case, we're moving at $100 per degree, or, you know, in this case, it's going to be per monthly bar, but we're moving at, or sorry, it's on a monthly chart, but we're moving at Saturn's degrees. We're going to put it at this price times 100, or also maybe times 10 to get a smaller picture. And that's going to give us an equivalent degree conversion for the current position of how far heliocentric Saturn has traveled since birth. So if I literally put this to $9,619, that would be times 10. 9,000, and sorry, that's 9,619, okay? And I'm gonna make sure it's set to the 1st of September, 2020. 1st of September, 9/1/2020, okay? Did that work? No, that didn't work. 9/1/2020. There we go. Slippery settings today. And since we technically want to see this go into the future, we could just extend it to the right. And you know, this is basically a line that is counting nothing more than heliocentric Saturn moving through price 360 degrees at a time in price. So as it gets to 360 degrees further, it just counts another level of 360 degrees. So at this point in time, it's traveled 960 degrees. Therefore, we're putting it up at $9,600. Okay, and from there, it's going up. That means it's set to $10 per degree. Well, let's set one up that's also not just the actual position times 10. Well, we can do actually times, actually, let's just to simplify what we're seeing right now, let's just knock those out for now. We're going to put also a line 10 times that. So let's copy it, paste it unchanged, meaning that it's just going to place it exactly where it is. And now I'm going to pop it up by 10. So I'm going to just move the decimal over. So we'll go up to 96,090. Now it's obviously going to go way up into the air, but we just want to keep an eye on that, okay? Because technically, if we looked at those two lines, this line here is a 1/1. If that's the 1/1, then this is a 1/10 of that line. It's 10 times less than that line. And technically, this is 10 times more than that line. So this is technically the 10/1 of this 1/1. So hopefully you're realizing what we're doing is we're kind of creating this stacked system of ratio, price degree ratio. If this is set to 100, well, technically, this line is more valid for this geometry. And then if we're looking at our lower level geometry of 10, we should be looking at this level of geometry for our Saturn. So let me take this a little bit further. I know that's a little bit weird, but maybe that didn't make full sense yet, but let's just take a look and go back to 100 so there's a little more room. And I'm going to take a fan now and lay it over this line, okay? So when I get a dynamic GAN fan, I'll just lay it here, place it down, and the only thing I can do in Optima is lay it down to $0, just like I did with the trend line, and I'll put it down at the same natal date, 8/15/1947. Again. And now I've got my 1/1 here, and I want to place it on the exact same place as the lower level Saturn here. And this is really the only way to do it in this software, to just sort of zoom right in and plop it down. I can't enter this coordinate. Otherwise, I would just enter this coordinate into the fan. I don't think there's a fan in Optima that does this, but it's also nice to get this number, because this number is truly the amount of bars. This is the speed of Saturn in bars, in monthly bars, in a sense. That's what that is. It's moving at 10.9 bars per or sorry, $10.9 per bar. That's what that is. Okay. So if we look at this, let's sort of zoom out a little here now. Let's make all these lines, I know it's a little bit weird, but let's make them all orange because I want to see them all as Saturn. They're all Saturn. They're all Saturn, but this is the actual position of Saturn going through. In a sense, this is the count of the amount of degrees that Saturn has crossed since birth. And I'm sure that that's sort of pretty revealing, you know, this idea that, you know, there's this level of the actual speed of Saturn. Then there's these other levels that are sort of double the speed of Saturn, triple the speed of Saturn. Okay. And well, I mean, that's basically all we've set up here. And already, I hope you're realizing, like, look at this kind of stuff. When Saturn does cross over new levels, we also get that same kind of effect of when Saturn crosses over the levels of these 360-degree levels on the wheel. There's this sort of separate movement that we can see related to heliocentric Saturn from the natal date, which is totally relatable to the harmonics of that position as well, right? So as it's counting up in time and in dollars, it's also, you know, reflected here in a harmonic. And so where did it move up from when it entered a new level? It moved up to the next level of Saturn and found resistance and fell. Yeah, it cracked through, and this is a long-term cycle and it's difficult to trade. There's smaller things within here. But the idea is that this level was the one that was being called for. This is the next level up. And you're sort of finding support at these lower levels. You're finding resistance at these higher levels. And it should be correcting into the boxes that it should be in along the time that it crosses 0 degrees. So once you have this set up here, you realize also, remember, this is set to 100, right? So if we looked at 10, you know, and we looked at how many, maybe that's 19. So let's go up another 9. Let's go to 27. Okay, that's 3 full rings. Yeah, we could technically go out and enter 27 rings here and start doing that. And you'll see GAN traders doing this. I'm not comfortable doing this kind of thing. I like the idea that the actual planets inside give us a conversion for all of those outer places within the circle. And I don't have to look at all of them in the circle. I could just look at the planetary alignments within there, and it will tell me where the relative position is within this circle or within this one ring, which is being defined by 360 degrees of a circle. So let's zoom back in. Let's get back just to our 9. And so if you realize that each 9 rings is a new level of 360, meaning it's a new level of your square of 9, well, I mean, there's basically a reason to at least mark off those levels to yourself as well, because it's like a new, again, like you're entering new levels of 360 degrees by each ring. Well, you might want to also see those other levels. So let's just do that. Let's just punch in our 9 rings. Well, it's way down there, but you know, you can see that that was a good level for that. 3710. Let's just do another one. Let's one that's more relevant. Go up to 100. So we've got 9 rings over here, up here. Okay. Horizontal line. And so if you had multiple levels that it's crossed through already, or you were dealing with many increments because your market changes in volume so much, or you're dealing with other time frames, the smaller time frames, you might be dealing with fluctuation a lot more. You might want to mark off these levels as like hard levels that, you know, are much more difficult for the market to break through. They require heavier volume, heavier trading volume in order to get breaking through these levels, which are relatable to, you know, the different actual 9 rings of our square of 9. So those are those levels, but you could also put the 3 levels of your same ring. Like if you're working with one ring here, 3710, sorry, if you're working with one setting, let's say it's 100 per degree. Sorry, let's do the 10 per degree, and we'll do the 27 rows, but let's mark off to ourselves, where is 18 rows? Okay, that's a good position for us to mark off as well. So that's the next level of 360 degrees up. Okay. Remember, you're at this part here. You're seeing these numbers here, 11, 28, 53. Now 298, then if I added the extra row here, we get 371. Well, if I keep going, what are those numbers? Right? 452, 452, 551, 541, 541. So it just continues outward, right? And they just continue to expand. So I want to know when those splits, when those moments occur. That's what I'm going to point out to myself. You're going to find heavier resistance at those levels. 9 rows. And let's mark off. Well, you know, we had 9 rows here, so that was there. We had this 18 rows, and we know 27 rows is just about there now, right? Well, I mean, it is there now, but the price really found some resistance at that number, didn't it? You know, this is a valid scale, this $10 per degree. We're looking at basically what you're seeing here is the fan set to $10 per degree of the heliocentric Saturn. So the price range that this is all sitting within is valid, especially relatable to these levels here of the 2x1 and the 3x1. And it's sitting within the rings of 9 rings, right? But if I wanted to trade this, obviously I would need to get in on a daily and see these levels closer. Okay, this exact $10 per degree is great to see this structure, is great to see it within the fan, but the actual trading that you're going to do with this kind of structure, you're going to want to see a tighter scale or a tighter time frame relatable to the $10 per degree. We could see the $100 per degree and decide, well, when is it that we would use that? And technically there is sort of some evidence here that suggests we should be using it at least a little bit. We should keep an eye on it. And you can see that it does define, especially the biggest movements, better. Go to $100. It's just the next level up, again, within 9 rows, perfect. So that means that the biggest structures fit perfectly. And we can mark that off. We've marked that off, that high. Okay. But also we realize this fan is the lower level fan. So let's just take this, let's copy it. Let's paste it unchanged again. Now we've got this secondary fan. Let's move it up. And well, what do we have up here? Remember this line? Our 10x1. Let's just set a fan to the upper level geometry where we have this day, right? And we've got a trend line that we set to the time and the day being times 100 for our natal Saturn position, natal heliocentric Saturn. Now let's take a look at this. Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's get rid of that other, the lower level geometry fan. Did I get it? Yeah, there we go. And now if you can, let's maybe zoom out a little bit. Let's take a look at this. Now this is something, you know, where you're basically dealing with the lower levels of the geometry relatable to the price ranges, you know, relatable to heliocentric Saturn way up there already at a higher ratio, well into farther up into higher levels of, you know, not just 9 rings, but maybe 18 rings or 27 rings up. Okay. So we're well below that planet, but that geometry, that slightly larger geometry is playing out. We're finding resistance at its 3x1 pretty much here at the high, and being relatable here to our $100 per degree, whoops, our $100 per degree levels, right? We're getting these good, good connections, especially to the proportions that you see at this highest level of volume, right? You know that's a high level of volume. Now, I can't actually show the volume on Nifty, unfortunately. It's a sort of a second layer of data that people need for the Nifty. But just realize that when you see this kind of stuff, it's a huge increase in volume. But also just realize that you could look at the speed of the market measured in this way here. The dynamic Ganfan measures basically the speed per bar. So if something is moving at a certain speed, we're measuring it from this low to say this high. And we're looking at here this setting, it's moving at $405 per monthly bar, meaning that this is one of the fastest, trends, first of all, that the Nifty's ever had, obviously. And the fastest speed that it's moving on average is that speed over this amount of time. That's all that's telling you. $500 per or $400-ish per day. Sorry, per monthly bar, not per day. That's a long period of time, and that's a huge price range, and that's the amount of dollars that it traveled in that amount of time. Very simple calculation, but also low to low, sort of the lower level speed that things moved is closer to about $50 per month. So those readings, much like what we're using here between 10 and 100, you're looking at something that is moving between $50 and $500 per monthly bar. Okay, those are big numbers, but this is something that trades way up in the price range. So you realize that basically this number of about $50, well, being relatable to what we've been doing previously, that you could use a ratio of $50 on your wheel, and you could be counting at $50 per degree that you see here. It's not 100% necessary. You could just use one by ones. Okay, and so if we lay this down here, we could just see it as being on average. Well, about half of that is, it's going to be double the 50, so about 100, right? Have this lower, where's 100? It's about, we could just enter it in. If we're using 100 already, it kind of proves to you that there is a connection between this trend and $100 per month. And therefore, if we're using $100 per degree on our wheel, we're marrying all of those kinds of things together, the geometry of the speed of the market and the volume of the market, and therefore the degrees of the geometry of the astrology. Okay, so let's just get rid of this Ganfan. We don't need it. Just proving to you that without volume, you can still get that kind of information, but volume does give you that sort of live reading of your ratio. Okay. So, I mean, these levels, I drove those red lines, but they're not entirely the most important thing to keep an eye on. Just realize that once they're broken, as you can see, it's kind of like breaking to a new level that's never going to be broken again. It doesn't happen every time. It kind of touches above, it tests it, falls back below. Okay, you can't be assuming that these kinds of long-term analysis are going to be perfect. But remember, this stuff, again, other than ratio, other than dollars per degree relationship, is 100% dependent on the natal date when you see the fan, and just the speed of heliocentric Saturn. And the levels are being relatable to just the standard geometry that you see on this being basically only the 0 degree mark and the 180 mark. Okay, and you're just seeing that plotted in price. Now, what about heliocentric Saturn? We've got 132 degrees. We've also got heliocentric Saturn here. Well, it's at about 41 degrees on this outer ring. So let's also pop those into our little numbers here. We get a little more information for ourselves. You know that we put those horizontal lines for the natal planet, so why not put it into our square of 9 levels too? 132. Orange, I like it thicker, and let's make it dashed. So that's our natal position of Saturn. And we can put also this position of Saturn. It's a different position of Saturn. It's the natal position as a 360 degree point within the circle that, that's around the pyramid here. So you've got here also 41 degrees, which is, 45, 41, close enough, but 41. We'll leave this one, we'll just color it orange, maybe make it a little more, less transparent. Okay. And so now you're getting a couple more levels that you can use. And if you were to look here on days when certain things like the natal conjunction occurs, let's take a look here now. Let's take a look at our natal transits that we had laid before. These are the positions of heliocentric Saturn being related to angles and being shown to us as a vertical line. So this is the day that heliocentric Saturn hits its original position. We see a movement upwards, and also technically, so we see a movement here towards the position of, well, this is, remember, let's just take a look here, the fan that we're looking at here, but this is the 10 by 1 of that larger geometry. So that's okay, we're looking at big geometry right now. First of all, notice the breakout over this new level here at the conjunction. Second of all, notice that on the actual date of the conjunction, when we're looking at heliocentric's natal position, heliocentric Saturn natal position, we start this day up here at 4,600, or sorry, this month at about 4,600 it opens. Sorry, where's the number? Yeah, 4,600, and it drops down. And well, natal position is down here at 3680, price gets down to 3870. And then in a couple months, we actually see the connection here to the actual price. We see the actual takeoff this month on the low. Well, we see that the price is relatable directly to the position of natal Saturn and maybe a few bucks up. Well, it's the position of that lower level. Remember, we were marking off the levels of 9 rings, right? So breakout over 9 rings. That was a significant price for it to find support and then kind of bounce away from. Now, as we move in, we've got a 30-degree transit, and we get a high coming in. We get a relationship to the natal position of Saturn again in a different ring. So if you were looking at this coming around here on the square on this date here, let's get rid of all these other planets again, just because we only want to look at Saturn. Oops, just Saturn. 132, okay. There's our natal position. Well, we had a spike over it, but look at the opening and closing on those candles or those bars. Let me get them a little thicker there so you can see them. Right around the harmonic of the fan, that's the 8 by 1 of the larger fan, the one that goes way up to $90,000. And so you realize that this high is pretty significant at this level, and it also opened at that level, and once it fell back below, it never came back up in this month and closed below it and fell below, right? So you're looking at a literal opening and closing that is relatable to this level. Yes, it did spike above. Where did it spike? It spiked to 180. Kind of gave it a geometric try. It tried to get above to try to get to the higher levels, and it stopped where? At 180 degrees of the square. So it's kind of coming around here. The price is around here at 132, right? But where's 132 in time? And the circle here, 132 is over here. Okay, and look at that. It's also on the square to natal position of Saturn. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove the natal transits because they do tell us something, but you need to deal with these as we did before. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, geez. Okay. There you go. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Geez, these tools, they're not playing with me well today. 8, 14. It's a monthly chart, so it's going to make a minimal difference, but yeah, there was a nice high there coming in, but we can still compare that to the position of the harmonic and the position here, and there is obviously many different relationships to make here. And I told you basically that, natal Saturn here at 180 degrees is calling the price to 180 degrees. And that's what we're seeing here as well. So as much as there was an aspect there when I had the wrong date set, 8/14/1947, it's at the 15th. Doesn't matter, it's a monthly chart, but there we go. Just to make sure that that is set 100%. Oh, sorry about that. The idea that I was trying to set into your mind, though, is that we're watching for, again, the movement of the entire cycle of natal Saturn, in a sense that we're looking for when it crosses 0 degrees, when it crosses its own position. We're marking its point out to ourselves there. But truly, that's not the first time that it crossed itself. Therefore, it's kind of, we need to see this information relative to this information, the 960. That was the point of laying the natal transits. And you need to use the natal transits in the way that you were shown before, with the 360-degree ephemeris and the planetary lines, and drawing down boxes or however you want to do that. But on these moments here, you can still probably find, like I showed you, look at here, you've got another, that's where the actual connection to the natal position came in. So there you go, that was a little cleaner. And then here you've got another connection here to the natal position. And then you've got here a movement upwards. And it's finding a position that's 1 by 1 of this 10 by 1. So what I'm trying to say is that during these periods, there are hot times for connection within 360 degrees, where you see these white lines, to move to the event within that section. But also you realize that it's being attracted to particular levels of 360 degrees. It's not just sitting down here where there's nothing going on with the position of Saturn as it moves up from natal date. This is the position of Saturn being counted from natal date, and it's way up here, and so is the price, and that's significant. Okay. And we're going to look at something a little bit quicker that's going to be, you know, maybe easier to find, or maybe easier for you to trade with. But let's just knock off these natal transits one time, okay? Because here's where the power, I think, of the natal position of the planet, without the natal transits, just the position inside of the square. This is where it's going to really become powerful. Yes, we're looking for it to cross new levels by crossing over 0 degrees, but let's see it make relationships angularly in this spectrum here to the natal position, okay? This is not a conjunction when we see this position of 90 degrees. It's aligned perfectly, though, to this row, which is, or sorry, this line, which is all these rows representing the position of natal Saturn. So let's take a look. As we come around, basically this is the day. First of all, you can see on that day, the price touches the natal Saturn's position. And let me just get rid of my crosshair. And then I'm going to come up here and let's look at the turns. Let's define turns for ourselves. First of all, if I look here on the pyramid, right, I can see natal Saturn is aligned. It's also sort of perfectly almost to the corner of the square here. So that's maybe coincidental. And so when you start moving through here, you know, you might find that it's also perfectly aligned to the edges of the circle, and the 0 degrees of the square, 0 degrees of the circle is also, you know, the diagonal positions on the square being important to natal position, but also there are just the diagonal positions on the square. It's hard to describe what I'm saying, but basically the idea is that the square itself has a geometry, and then we're kind of laying this alternate geometry over it, but it's very similar, okay? Happens to be very similar. It could be here. We'll look at something that's completely different later. Okay. So anyway, let's point here on the actual natal position. Okay, and you can see maybe it's some more defined things throughout this. But you can see that these are overlays, which are just counting 30 degrees, then 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 72 degrees. Then we've got 90 degrees, 120 degrees. These are basically astrological aspect angles, common ones. Those are just the standards. Okay. You set that up in Optima by clicking in here, seeing our square of 9 settings. You've got here this overlay, right? And I'm just setting it to 45, moving clockwise, counting clockwise from my selection, my natal selection. and then repeating that angle over and over again in the circle. And if I split it up by these numbers, I get basically, you get your 12 sections of the circle, your 8 sections of the circle, and your 5 sections of the circle. It's just good divisions to keep an eye on. Okay. And now what we're going to do is watch natal Saturn, the position of heliocentric Saturn make angles in the square to natal Saturn. So we come into here, and well, we can see basically here on this day, heliocentric Saturn touches not only maybe 1 degree over, it hits the natal position 90 degrees. Okay, we get basically a high coming in on that month. Then we can move over a little bit and we see, a sort of secondary movement being associated to the section where it touches the actual corner. We're going to concentrate more on the degree it hits with the degree of the natal position, okay? Because I feel that it's going to be more powerful. But I'm also going to try to be very precise. Let's take a look at when the actual, if we're trying to associate it to a change, when did it happen? It's usually we're going to look at the moment it touches the line and then the moment that it stops touching the line, and seeing those as 2 almost separate moments. Okay? So the moment that it hits the degree that we're looking at, and then the moment it also passes that degree to the next degree. It moves slow enough that we can do that. So here we have it moving 1 more degree over, and we find in this month, we find the high. Okay, it's not perfect. Where does the price go? Well, the price goes from this moment, it goes up to 41 degrees in price. It jumps up over the 360 degree mark, jumps up to 41 degrees in price, which we know is this other position, finds a high and moves down. Okay? This is when it's being associated to this sort of square event, right? Where heliocentric Saturn is square to the natal position. It's not truly square, it's just square on the chart here on this circle. Sorry, within this one ring. So let's move on. Let's do some more major moments. Obviously, we've marked off when it crosses the 0 degrees, but let's see the moment that it crosses 180 degrees from natal position. That would be an opposition, okay? And look at that, a major low. Pop upwards, we go back to 41 degrees. What does that look like on the chart? That looks like from here, which is, get our movement here. We're looking at about $2,100, okay? Yeah, $2,100, which is just over $180, sorry, 180 degrees in this section of 360 degrees. So let's look at the wheel here, the price. If we take our selection tool here, if I move my price on the outer wheel, okay, to about 180 degrees and a little higher, right? We're looking at the real position here of the price on the wheel. Now, can I convert that here? I think I put in the price. It's probably going to show it on the outside wheel. So if I pop it in here, let's try 192. Okay, so that's where I'm assuming this is. Let's enter it in here as well. Let's just make sure we can make that measurement. We want to know exactly where this exact price. Yeah, I know you can do some calculation, etc., to figure out that number. There's all sorts of formulas to figure out the positions of numbers on the wheel. But look at this. I could just kind of eye it. I know that it's going over 180. 180 degrees is right there. We're just over it. So I could just punch in, let's see, 192. It's my next significant number up that I would deal with. 192. It's not quite there, a little bit higher. So I would go up to maybe about 200 and then 225. You're just measuring it out. It's like a ruler. You don't have to be too specific. But the idea is you're telling yourself is this is a degree in price, technically. It then moves to 41. It moves from here to 41 degrees when we have our square. Okay, sorry, our opposition on here. And look at where we are here on the wheel, 200 degrees, 210 degrees, 220 degrees. Where is the price in this little section here? Well, let's take a look. We punched in 200 degrees, or instead of our, what if I chose 192, then 132, 192, 200. Okay, so 225 maybe. All right, so that's basically where the bottom came in. That's basically relatable to where the position of Saturn is in this 360 degrees. Technically, if you also took this level of 300, this section of 360 degrees, or this 360 degree section, you could also plot the actual position of heliocentric Saturn. So let's do that too. Might be a little bit tedious for you to do this all the time, but you're going to see how you can do this with the moon, and it's going to help you a little bit too. So let's take another trend line. Place it here. And this time I'm going to use the levels that you see. 360 degrees here, 1100, and 360 degrees here is 2800. So let's just take our position of Saturn. Let's make it, well, instead this time let's just make it yellow, since I want to make it significantly different. But I'd like to keep all my planetary colors the same usually, and yellow I use for Uranus. But let's just make it dotted, dashed. Okay, and let's put it to not 0 degrees this time, but we want it to be at 0 degrees of the wheel. Okay, but we want to know when is heliocentric Saturn going to cross this position, and then when is it going to move to the next ring. So let's plot that actual movement on here. So we've got here $1,100, right? So we can look here on our, sorry, just wanted, since we're within, within $1,100 to $2,800, I want to lay the thing at 0 being $1,100 and the top price being $2,800. And then we're just going to look for the 2 dates that it entered this range and exits this range. So we're looking at basically this date here of 1/4/2003, because that was the date that it entered this ring here, right? 86. What am I doing here? This is a date within this harmonic of 360 degrees on this outer wheel. This heliocentric Saturn is right here. Okay, so we've got here this date. We can actually just punch it into our coordinates. 1/4/2003. 1/4/2003. And then our position on this date of $2,800 being 12/29/2015. 12/29/2015. Would that work? No. What am I saying? 2005, sorry. There we go. And so you can see the angular connection here. And where did it find its low in relation to the actual position of heliocentric Saturn? And notice here, as it's going through here, well, right above 180 here, right? Saturn is actually below, you know, because this is technically below 180 degrees, right? So the price is just of the actual heliocentric Saturn position right there. This is the position you see this planet making around in this ring. But technically this is repeated over and over again each level. So let's move this up, copy it, and we can just place it here roughly at 2,800. Just make sure the dates are right, about 2,800, and actually just 2,800 and the next level up, 5,300. Okay. And so these are these channels that start to be built by the actual position of the planet crossing through. And, you know, there is technically a 180 degree harmonic of this, and also any other number of harmonics of this particular position. We could take this exact position here, move it up to, copy it, move it up to 180 degrees, and move this up to 180 degrees on this date. And that's your exact midpoint. This is your 180 degree harmonic of heliocentric Saturn. So as heliocentric Saturn passes up through this channel, this position is 90 degrees from it. And you can see that it acts as a secondary trend line there. It's not perfect. We're not looking for perfection from these lines. We're looking at them for them as guides and limits. Okay. And then once we get to higher levels of geometry, those levels get steeper, or these lines get steeper and steeper. Let's just move on to one more and do that same thing. Remember, I tried to do it manually and show you how you can enter all the coordinates, but we can just eye it as well. Look, you know, that's 0. You know, that's when Saturn crossed 0 degrees of the wheel, of this outer wheel. And then we know that this is the day over here that it crossed the next time, and that would be the price of this harmonic. And technically, this is just repeated up every single level of 360 degrees. And you know that each level of 360 degrees, because it's the square of 9, is expanding. And therefore, the trend line is not something that just stays straight. It kind of bends upwards. You start seeing people use trend lines that curve. Well, it's kind of like this effect being shown over longer periods of time. If I continue this upwards, I think you'd realize that you'd get a really good effect of channeling these positions, just sort of fit the channels that the price moves within. And it's reflecting basically the relationship of the price between this position and the 180 degree harmonic of this position, basically the other side over here, and maybe a 90 degree harmonic over here and over here, just within this one ring though. And those prices would be reflected by the matching degree within this range of 360 degrees. And I think you're seeing some powerful connection there, hopefully. Let's zoom in here a little bit, or let's zoom out a little bit. You can continue on. You realize too that hopefully, or I hope that you realize too that these things, once you set this kind of thing up and you're in this range of $100 per degree, well, way back when, you might not have been dealing with that. You might have been dealing with lower levels of geometry. You might have been dealing with $1 per degree at this stage, and there would have been more channels, tighter lines. Maybe you want to deal with it on a smaller time frame, like a daily or a weekly. But let's move on here. I'm going to save this. It's probably enough of the Nifty, I think. What would you do with this? You'd continue it on, and you might see these kinds of changes in relationship to the positions of planets moving around here. Technically, all of the planets work, but yeah, you should probably look at the ephemeris and find a planet that has a lot of stuff going on with it. Aspects are a great way to look at it, especially just from our point of view. Yes, it's not exactly the best way in the classic astrology, but this is what we're going to use as Gann traders. Just pop down a couple more of these just to see, if I put down here a line, well, that means that heliocentric Saturn is going like this up through here. Great moments, right? When it crosses the natal position, the price is there. So how do you trade this? I mean, if you don't know how to trade price targets, it's something that you're working with is constantly the position of the market versus where you think the market is going to go. You're trading towards that. And yeah, the market can kind of fluctuate all over. That's why we need to kind of keep an eye on a few different things, maybe a few different geometries, a few different time frames. Okay. But if we're just building, I'm connecting the 0 degree point when heliocentric Saturn crossed 0 degrees or 360 degrees of each ring, and putting its position is a straight line at the speed at which it took to get through that full ring. And you're getting these beautiful channels, right? Amazing for trading. Notice here at the high, look at that. Look at our harmonic of our position. Look at all these connections at this moment to the position of heliocentric Saturn, right? That's our 360 degree mark. Look at our 180 degree harmonic. That means at this moment at the high, the price is 180 degrees from the position of natal Saturn, from the position of heliocentric Saturn within this ring, okay? So it's exactly 180 degrees. It's from here, it's across. We can just use our stick here and move it across. We would find that this price is just about 132 degrees. So we know that that basically is way over here. Well, there's 132 would be right there. Okay. So it's not quite in line with heliocentric Saturn, but you can see that heliocentric Saturn is just slightly higher than the price there, and 132 is actually the position of the natal planet as a price. Okay. And look where it falls that day, to 41 degrees, the other position within the, okay, moves directly down. So it finds this high at the natal position of Saturn, of heliocentric Saturn. And where is heliocentric Saturn? At this high on the square of 9, it is 288 degrees into its cycle, essentially 72 degrees from natal position. So it's like a trigger again, right? The quintile. So I hope that's pretty powerful for those who trade the Nifty. It's going to work on anything like this. We're going to move right into using this exact same kind of stuff. I'll use it now. We'll use it on the S&P a little bit, and we'll use it on the Bitcoin a little bit. We'll use it on. I'll do it a little bit on a intraday. But it's we're going to use those same general rules and understandings, but we're going to get in and out on the levels of tightness of the lines, and we're going to try to track ourselves a little better on the square. So let me pull this one up here. So the SPX, if we look at our ephemeris, I'm not looking this time at Independence Day, okay? I'm looking here at the Buttonwood Agreement, 5/17/1792. I like to use 4:43 in the morning. That's sunrise Manhattan time. You might find varying information about that timing. Okay, this is just the time that I've been given, and I like it. I've seen a heavy connection on any kind of trading that I do to that exact time of day, especially with the moon. But if you've got your own time, use it and see if you can find the connection and let me know. Now, right away, you realize that this being heliocentric, again, this isn't really classic astrology. It's not really a natal chart. It's just an ephemeris. It's a view of the sky that day, the actual positions of the sky. Literally not just the positions in the sky from Earth, but we're looking at them, in this case, if they're heliocentric, it's as if we were out in space and we were looking at the entire solar system and we were seeing the positions relative to the sun. Okay, hopefully that, I kind of forgot to explain that before, but you know, heliocentric, geocentric, we use the cycles similarly, but what they are scientifically is completely different things. So here we have our natal Buttonwood Agreement, and I'm going to look here for some anomalies. And well, if I said to you, you know, before we were looking at Saturn because it had all kinds of things going on, well, you know, that means to me that in this case, well, Saturn has a bunch of things going on, and yeah, Saturn is great to look at. We've already looked at heliocentric Saturn today, but you can definitely look at heliocentric Saturn for anything. But why not, in this case, use something else? We've already talked about how quintiles are important. Well, let's take a look at the quintile that's available to us. Well, it's not quite a perfect quintile, but here we have Uranus and Neptune. That's kind of interesting. A lot of people like to focus on Uranus for the S&P. They call it very Uranian. There'll be a lot of people that will read the S&P date or the Buttonwood date and see it as very Uranian geocentrically. I've seen a lot of interpretations of this chart, no question, but I'm just going to say, look here. There's a quintile on the heliocentric chart. We look at it. As simple as that. There is also a biquintile, a 144. So the Mercury-Saturn cycle would be something I would want to look at. But I'm certainly, in this case, going to look at something relatable to Uranus, and I'm going to look at maybe something relatable to Neptune, because look at Neptune being trine to Jupiter there. Sorry, being conjunct to Jupiter there, right? And, you know, all of these cycles might be something I might pay attention to, but realize that if they all have something about them that is relatable to speed, being that if this one here, like this is Venus and Uranus, well, Venus is moving fast, Uranus is moving slow. That means that Venus is moving transiting Uranus's position. So if I wanted to look at this cycle, I would look at Venus transiting natal Uranus. That's a good way to deal with this kind of stuff. Yes, it would be valid to see Uranus transiting natal position of Venus, but that's not going to help you for day-to-day trading. So if you need something fast, you look towards the fast cycles. Is there something I should use in the fast cycles here? Well, look, there's a nice, strong sesquiquadrate that's a 135-degree aspect. It's something powerful between Venus and Uranus. Venus and Uranus is a classic kind of, they're classic planets, Venus being a money planet, Uranus being a sort of revolutionary planet. This is America. It's a great connection esoterically. But again, this is a heliocentric chart, so it's not necessarily something that would be classically used. It's just ignore all that for now, then get back into it if that's something you're interested in. But for now, look at the fact that there's some powerful aspects, in a sense, good harmonics or alignments on the wheel that are powerful enough to say, well, out of all of the hundreds and thousands of probably relations I can find with all of these different things they've got going on here for me, including the nodes and the geocentric with the moon and things like that. Well, this one is powerful enough that it's being pointed out to me very simply right from the start. And I would look at relationships to Uranus and I would look at relationships to Neptune. I would look at probably, just like we did before, the relationship of Uranus transiting itself. So let's look at that. So what I'm going to look at here, I'm going to get, first of all, well, I guess we could set up our natal transits. Why not? Let's take a look. We can get our date set, 5/17/1792. And you know this is going to be pretty long term, but we're going to get in a little closer. So I'm going to make sure that the time is right. And I'm going to set it to negative. Well, I'm not going to worry about the time right now, but if it was daylight saving time, I think it's, yeah, it's -4 in May. Okay. So I'm going to double check that anyways, but GMT would be the New York offset. Okay. And so you've got everything set here, and we want to see the Uranus natal return. So we're going to see the actual position of Uranus transiting natal Uranus, and it's going to be big, right? It's going to be a big, long cycle. Oh, and it's heliocentric, sorry. What did I get that? Heliocentric. Okay. Got a few things going on there. I think I cut and paste something by accident. So anyways, you're looking here at this transiting cycle. Let's make sure I've got it set right. 40:43 a.m. -4. Okay, Uranus, all the different aspects available to us. And I'm looking at 2 degrees orb. So that's what you see here, that sort of, that space around the actual transit is the timing of 2 degrees in towards the aspect and then 2 degrees away from it. You see that 2 degrees orb especially becomes quite hot. I mean, a lot of people like to customize their orb settings, but I would use 2 degrees. It's a powerful one, okay? It's always different for each planet. 2 degrees orb is a different amount of time for Uranus than it is for Saturn, that is it for any other planet. So anyways, that's just another thing there. So these are good for us, but what do these tell us? They tell us the current cycle of Uranus out of the 300 years of possible data that we've got for the S&P here. Let's just take a look here on a logarithmic scale just to see the history of the S&P and this cycle. It's quite good. You know, you get a lot of nice turn dates. Whoops, sorry. So if you were using just classical astrology, using ideas of standard technical analysis, you're getting a high coming in, a turn date on a major transit, and a movement downwards. You're getting changes on the day itself and in association to the orb, the entrance and exit from the orb. Okay, major movement here. But how do you relate that all to price? And really, I mean, it becomes quite long period, especially with this natal Uranus. So let's just zoom back out. Let's just take a look at non-logarithmic. So when something starts growing like this, obviously we just, we start to use the square of 9 immediately, because it's going to help us define how something that's just growing and growing and growing might be defined. And so we'll take down our static square of 9 again, lay it down. And remember, this is just counting those degrees as they sit within this square. And let's just take our natal. Oh, actually, we don't need any this time. We just need to set. Let's do set it to 100 again. And actually, we're going to use lower than that, but just for now. And we'll set it into being. Sorry, just make it a visual again for you so that we can work with it. 360, 180, all right. And where is our natal position of Uranus? 138. Block that, already had it put there actually. So that's our 138 degrees in the box. So that's where we find natal Uranus in our pyramid, right? And if we're going to use those long-term movements of Uranus here, let's just take a look. Maybe if we move here through here, I've got Venus there. Let's get rid of that just for now. This is a long-term movement that we're looking at, and you can kind of pull it up here. Yeah, the transit is important, but also the relationship here. Here we have Uranus crossing this 0 degrees of the square, right? Coming up to 298, and we get a massive movement upwards. Now it's 90 degrees there, or sorry, 45 degrees, this first corner of the square up here. It's also a big change. Remember, if this was basically the all-time high at this point, that's a massive change to happen. We've got, up $1,000 and we're going down to 850 bucks. And we'll figure out some different ways to look at the pricing, but let's just, again, we're just generally looking at the timing. Now let's look at when it aligns not only to this corners of the square or the circle, but let's look here. You've got here, this is a 30-degree relationship to natal position. High coming in. Let's keep going. It's going to move slowly, so we can zoom out. Here you have during the opposite. Well, look at that. It's technically not opposite really, but it is, on the same line. Let's just get rid of our transits for now. But you realize that the angular relationships that you're seeing within here are also the standard angular relationships of the outer circle, but they're sort of folded in on each other. And so a 90-degree relationship looks different than it does than it does on the outer circle within the triangles, and within the pyramid. It looks different. So coming out here, this was again a perfect sort of high. Remember, this is a daily chart. So as Uranus hits the moment that it's going to hit, what is this, 314 and 315 degrees, that moment in between where it actually changes right over the line, we get a massive change. Let's continue on. Looking for Uranus to hit the next, important motion. And I'm sure you're seeing lots of other stuff not being defined by it. Well, that's because there's other planets, there's other cycles. This is weeks and months and years going by. You could be using this for time dates with other planets. But let's take a look here. Now we're going to be moving 30 degrees from natal position of Uranus, only on the square, right? So at this moment, let's see that moment it actually touches right there, 319, right? You get basically the high coming in, a couple days off. Let's see the moment that it leaves, hits in 320 right. Oh, a little further down. There we go. So we have the low coming in there. It's not very significant at this point, right? So it kind of found a high as it hit the 30 degree and fell and hit a low after it clicked 1 degree over. And yeah, you could technically just lay down every degree here of Uranus. I've got here a tool that's showing here every degree of heliocentric Uranus. So technically, yeah, you can just plot those on, and they should define some great turn times for you. All right. So, you know, I'm showing you how to do it manually, but obviously in modern software, there's going to be some stuff to help you along the way. And look at how this kind of defines some great moments, right? I mean, this is a midpoint here, but the next point down, let's look at the relationship between not just, again, the natal position, but maybe the more significant turns being more relatable to when we've got a little bit of a combination of both. You've got the outer circle out here, which is defining, you know, these helpful moments within the individual rings, but you've also got the square itself making, you know, if you were to put, say, the selection rather than on natal Uranus, if you just kind of set it to the center, you get that perfect cardinal cross, all of your standard relationships. So this is technically also playing out this standard relationship that you see on the square. But I want to see the tilted geometry against the square. And then I want to see it hit both of them. So coming around again. Let's come down and you see a major kind of move here as, you know, there's that movement there where it crosses a degree into touching this blue line, which is technically 45 degrees from natal position. Okay. I don't have my selection wheel here. Let me get that going. So you can see my selection here. And is that set up right? Things get a little funny sometimes. There we go. 0 degrees relatable to the actual position here. So it's moved over 45 degrees. You can see that there. And so we see a major change as it actually clicks over, right? You see that defined by that moment there. The next moment down, when it moves beyond that moment of touching and being in the aspect on the square, you know, you get this other change, drastic, moving downwards. Now let's take a look at kind of at, well, at one, well, we get a little bit of a change there. And here we get another change, but this is relatable to the corner of the square. And, you know, this is where we actually see a drop now below, okay, the actual 360 degree line. So what happened to my static square? I didn't get my extended information. There we go. So that's my 360 degree line. That's my 180 line. Did we enter the position of natal Uranus? No, we didn't. 138. I like it yellow because it's Uranus. It's just my color for Uranus. And I make it a little bit thicker than natal planet. So that's the position there. You can see it repeated upwards. All right. It's nothing specific yet, but we're going to bring it into how we did before. So let's also bring in that 138 degree position is also 80 degrees of the circle. So let's mark off 80 degrees. So here we have a good system that we could kind of zoom right in on now. But this system, I'm sure you're seeing with this bigger, you know, this would probably be more in tune with monthly charts and counting more degrees of Uranus to get a bigger perspective, because as you zoom in, you realize that on a daily chart especially, you're missing a lot of information here. There's not all these calls that are being defined by Uranus. And maybe with some extra stuff along here, finding some support and resistance along these lines within these rings, within the range of 360 you're trading, you might find some additional levels relatable to Uranus, you know, relatable to, say, at this point here, we're coming in, well, we see that Uranus is way up here at 345. You know, this might not be the level of geometry to use for here. We might be using $100. Well, this is going to be maybe $10 per degree. And if we see 9 rows, well, we do fit within 9 rows, right? So let's take a look at that. And now we have a little bit more of a connection here. We have a sort of support and resistance that is working out and also making a logical sense with, you know, crossing a position which might be relatable to natal Uranus In this sense, it's a 150-degree transit here. Sorry, here at the high here, we get the 150. And it falls down not only to natal Uranus, 138, right? But also the equivalent natal Uranus at 80 degrees. Let's continue on. Bounce there. High coming in when actual Uranus makes another transitional move. Okay, another degree over. I mean, it's not really relatable to natal Uranus at this point, but it is a degree movement. But it also might be a natal transit. You can see that. Well, yeah, we definitely get that, right? We've got a 30-degree natal transit. So we might be looking at the 360-degree wheel for these moments of the transits to define other levels for us and turns. But doing this gives us an ability to kind of not just look at one planet. We could look at this planet that we've got here. It's giving us amazing turns throughout history. Let's just keep going here. Just each individual degree of Uranus and relating it to then the level of natal Uranus. So the click over of 1 degree, a relationship being made to natal Uranus, and then the price reacting by moving towards it. All right. You can see that not every move is defined by it, but many are, and it moves very well with these price ranges. How do you know when it's going to be at one range or another? Well, we're already kind of talked about that, right? We talked about laying a fan from the natal date and running it up across through time and seeing the different harmonics of that. So let's do that as well. Okay, but we're going to move away from Uranus immediately after that. Okay, so I'm going to just take my trend line again. I'm going to place it down here. I'm going to do this one more time for you so you see it, okay? And in a sense, we need also that Gann counting. I think I've got it already set, so we don't have to do that. Maybe not. Gann count. No, okay. Well, I'll just set it up from scratch for you. Gann count. Right. Pull my toolbars up here. Count. So Gann day count. It's just the day counter, but truly it counts anything. And here I'm going to go into my settings for Astro, and I'm going to choose Uranus. And I'm going to choose geocentric in my settings, sorry, heliocentric in my settings, and make it yellow because it's Uranus. And I'm going to set it to 5/17, 1792. This is only going to be able to set to the day. And I don't really care about seeing any increments of it. We've already seen every degree of Uranus, of heliocentric Uranus. Okay. But what I want to do again, I want to see that count, right? That way I can set up my amount of degrees that have passed line, in a sense. So this is that line that's counting from natal position. So again, 5/17, 1792. Could punch in the time this time, 4:43 a.m. And it's set to $0, right? You can see that, it's way up here. It looks almost horizontal because it's moving 300 years, okay? Now let's take a look here. 98.31. So that would be the times 10 number. We're here with our levels of our chart set. We're within 9 rings at $10 per degree. Let's just take a look. What was the $1 per degree, right? If I set that to 9 rings, well, that's way down there, right? So obviously $10 per degree is proper, right? And we're just about at the top there, right? 37.10. That's the top of our 9 rings. And then we've got here our line, I'll make it thick yellow so that you know that what it is, dashed maybe. And And so I'm going to set it to $983.10 on September 4th, 2020, because that's going to be a perfect $1 per degree. And then I'll set up the 10 by 1 of that, which is relative to this level of geometry we're currently working in. And we'll see those two bigger and smaller levels, okay? Just like we did with the Nifty when we zoomed in a little at the end there. So I'll take this, I'll set it to September 4th. September 4th, 2020, and it's at 12 p.m. Sorry, 12 a.m. And we're going to look at it being 983.10 on that day. And now we've got this line here, right? We can also set, let me just clarify what I'm seeing now. We don't really need to see all these degrees of Uranus. Let's just get rid of that. And let's just set now into the future that line, extend to the right. And now, you know, I didn't do this before, but if you realize that this is just a 10 times line, I can just copy this, paste it. And I want to set that level of 10 times higher, right? I can just multiply the number by 10 here. So I can just set 98.10. And so we've got two levels here, one well above it, just like we did before on the Nifty, which we can set a fan to be the higher level of geometry. And since we're looking at right now $10 per degree, this is our Uranus at $10 per degree. Let's take a look at that fan. I'm going to get my dynamic GAN fan, set it here. You know that it's basically going to be there on that day, and then I set the corner of it down back to $0 on the natal date, 5/17. You get tired of typing natal dates, I know, but just once you have these long-term charts set up, you don't have to touch them. You don't have to set them up over and over again. 1792 and 443. Oops. Ooh, I'm getting some funny stuff going on there. 17.5, 17. That's no good. Getting a little bit funny there with my coordinates. It's jumping on me. 5, 17. Just going to copy it, delete it, and reset it. Just take a look now. Maybe I can change this 5, 17. Oof, it's messing me up here. So it's fooling around the times. I'm just hitting enter and it's just jumping around. I don't know, it must be a little bug. I told you I've experienced a couple little bugs recently with Optima. They've done a major update recently and maybe it needs a little bit. I am not sure what's going on there, but anyways, we'll get it close enough. Okay, 5, 17. There. Okay. Now we know that this is the 8x1 relatable to, oh no, that's not the 8x1 at all. Where are we? Here there we go. Pull it down this edge here. I guess everything was kind of moving around, sorry. Basically, I was trying to enter the coordinates just to be, you know, at the natal date, and then we can just manually place the fan on the trend line that's moving from the natal date at the speed of natal Uranus. Sorry, at the speed of heliocentric Uranus from the natal date. So there you go, that's your fan setup. I'll make it yellow just because I like yellow for Uranus. It's stippled, you just want to see it, just like, you know, just to get a harmonic and a view of the harmonic and the way the price sits within the geometry of the planet and when it passes up and over things. Okay, you're looking here. Well, I mean, we already talked about how when natal Uranus crossed that position of one of these special degrees here, like I showed you before, the 0 degrees of the line, we had that movement upwards. So let's take a look here. Right. See our next movement here. We had a major day. Okay, this was a major day. This was something I mentioned before for the Nifty was that we didn't have a moment like this where Saturn had already gone over 360 degrees and then we came back in time. We couldn't see that on the data we had, just based on timing. So look at here, you know, this is being basically the beginning of a major time. This was Uranus crossing 360 full degrees of a cycle and ending up at 0 degrees again. Okay. It's not a natal cycle conjunction, but it's a cycle within this 360 degrees where that's a point. Not only is it the point when Uranus crossed a 0 degree point of this square, but it's also the last point that it crosses before it goes back to 0. And so that only happens, you know, every 200 or so, was it? Can't remember the actual numbers for the orbits. Doesn't matter what it is. Here we see we've only got, in 300 years, we've only gone 983 degrees. Okay, so since, well, not 300 years, but since 1789 in this case, but we're using the natal date of 1792, right? So it's gone 983 degrees. So that's 2 cycles and a bit. Just kind of like we were looking at the other one with the Nifty, was about the same amount by chance. Okay. So these kinds of structures we've already seen being powerful for us on the Nifty. They work well here. You're getting these movements here as the harmonic crosses through. You're getting a connection to the price of the natal position of the natal Uranus. Where does it fall? It falls to, well, it falls generally to that price of the next position down, but also, you know, it falls right through. So maybe during this time, just like on the Nifty, we need to see those even bigger forms of geometry. Maybe at this point, we need to maybe only go up to $20 per degree, okay? But like I said, we don't necessarily need to work with all of those in-betweens unless we are getting down and seeing the smaller details. And, you know, the Uranus cycle is not really for that. This is for bigger movements. And we can now see instead a relationship to Uranus. So this is something new that we haven't done yet. And I'm going to lay down Venus because we saw, why? Whoops, sorry. We saw on our ephemeris, Venus and Uranus, right? Just a reason to use it. But I mean, Venus and Uranus, you might try on all tech stocks out there. It's just something about those 2 planets that go well together classically in astrology. But also this is a heliocentric chart and they're in aspect to each other. Sorry, I keep clicking on that. I don't want that there actually. Okay, so now that we are looking at also heliocentric Venus, you're going to realize immediately, look at here. If I take my, actually I've got here, it's going to count planetary angles. Well, before I was counting heliocentric Venus or Uranus, well, this is the actual only 1 degree. We're not counting each degree of Venus here. We're counting just the 0 degree mark. So every time heliocentric Venus crosses 0 degrees, actual 0 degrees. So once it makes its actual 360 degrees through this full circle and goes back to 1. Okay. And look how much faster that happens for Venus, right? Basically on these 2 highs, you're getting heliocentric Venus. And so that's a much better time for trading daily, right? If we're trading on a monthly scale and we were looking at these huge movements of Uranus, well, I mean, look at, it's months and months and months you're waiting. Well, heliocentric Venus is fast, it's good for day trading, and so we already know that there's an aspect in the heliocentric chart between them. Why don't we use them? It's a square aspect. This is the square of 9. I mean, it's not such a, you don't need to do that kind of thing. You don't need to make those relationships, but you can. Okay. So here we go. What I want to do now, instead of dealing with trend lines and stuff like that, what I really want to see, just like we did before, I want to see, remember I was drawing those lines when not really the planetary line or the position of the planet on this outer ring going around and up through this, and not really counting, you know, this is what we're doing with these positions here. We're counting from natal date, the amount of degrees that Uranus has moved. So in this case, what I want to see is those little segments. Every time Venus crosses 0 degrees of the rings, right? 0 degrees of this ring and moves to another ring of the pyramid, I want to see that moment, just like we did with heliocentric Saturn, but in this case, it's going to be so much faster, right? And so as we come around here, you see that it happens right there when it happens across 0 degrees, but then it happens again immediately, and immediately it happens again, okay? So these little segments are going to be much faster. And what I can do, instead of seeing all of those movements and moments, okay, what I want to see actually is this segment of time broken down, and I'll just use a GAN box to do that. And it's going to give me that same kind of information. All right, so I'm going to take my GAN box, dynamic GAN, GAN box. Instead of a fan, you can use a box, right? And so you've got two levels of 360 degrees here to define for yourself. And I'm going to define them by starting the date that heliocentric Saturn is at 0 degrees. Well, sorry, not when, yes, sorry, we are doing that. We're going to lay the box relative to this outer ring, and we're going to look at the relationship of the moving planets within. So let's look at the moment that heliocentric Venus crosses 0 degrees. Plop it down at 360 degrees and then over to the day that it ends, right? So remember, I'm drawing trend lines down from 0 degrees and up to 360 degrees. Just drawing a box does the same thing, and it adds extra angles for me. All right, and so we've got a special box now that's sort of relatable to heliocentric Venus. I like bright green for Venus. I'll make it a little more dim. And so we can set it to 3710 as the corner at the top. So it's perfect, 3710 and 2980. So what is this? This is the speed of the moment here. Look at here. This is Venus crossing through the ephemeris all the way around and hitting 0 degrees again. That's what that is giving us. All right. Let's move down one more. Since we've got this built here, we can just click on this and duplicate it by hitting price flip. It's going to move. Oops. Should be able to go one down. I'll click down at the bottom of the box, I think. Price flip. Oh, no, it's not going to let me do that. All right. No big deal. We'll just place it here. And realizing, obviously, because this is the square of 9 and each level of 360 degrees, well, that's a little bit, there we go, 360 degrees. We want to place it right on the right time, but then we also want to set the right prices. And the 360 degrees is not the same size, one ring down. So we're at 2330. Oh, yeah, 2330 as the bottom and 2980 as the top, 2980. There you go. Yeah, that's a pretty nice little channel for yourself to be working with when you're dealing with this kind of thing. I mean, this is a daily chart, and now you've set the cycle of Venus, heliocentric Venus, within this ring, right? And now we can also see possibly the relationships of Venus to natal Uranus. So we can also put down a natal transit tool. Let's take a look here. I think I already have it set, so I don't have to go through the whole process. That's Uranus, Uranus. We don't need that. We want to see Venus and Uranus. So if you just take a look at the settings here, 4:43 a.m., right? And we are in GMT time, -4. Okay. And aspects, well, I'm not showing all of them right now just to simplify it because it would get very busy really fast, okay? So I'm just showing here the conjunction, the square, the trine, the opposition. And as you're coming through, here you have this dip right down here, perfectly on the conjunction, okay? And we're finding a connection not only to 360 degrees of the square, you can zoom in here. Let's look at here. right? Getting a conjunction, that means that Venus is conjunct to the natal position of Uranus. It's on the square there. Price is at about 360 degrees, but it does dip down just below. Let's take a look there. What's that price? That price is about 21.91. Okay. What was the low here? Should give me the actual low if I touch the bar. Giving it to me. It's kind of giving me the information about the aspect. Just a second. There we go. Low of 21.91. There you go. So 21.91. If we kind of just added here, right? What if we added from this position? If we know that at 360 degrees is one ring over here, is right here within this ring. Well, that's 0 degrees. If we're moving down, maybe just down one ring, one section of this natal position down, we might want to see if there's some support at that price. So if it dipped here from, here's our 0 degree mark, okay? Our first connection to natal Uranus would be 90 degrees from there, right? This is natal Uranus here within this ring, and that's 350 degrees. Now, it seems to have broken below 350 degrees. This would mean that it was square to natal Uranus on this chart, okay? But let's put that in just to see. 350, you know that it's not going to be, it's going to be a little bit too tight. So it's right up there, really close to where the 360 is. So, you know, it's a little bit further. So let's just do the next major move would be an opposite, right? I mean, there's also, there's in between angles in there. If the opposite is too far, you might try those other angles. That's really what I'm doing here. Very basic process. It'd be very easy to do on a manual chart. You don't need an Optima for that kind of process. So let's just take a look. If I punch this in here, I'm just going to convert, go down, and we're over here at 260. So let's try that, 260. Just get rid of 350 and go to 260. You know, that's basically where it fell. Basically fell nearly 180 degrees from natal Uranus at the conjunction and started to move upwards. But let's just say that at this moment, we had a huge influx in volume. And we did, obviously. This was one of the biggest moves in volume that's ever happened. And what I want to do is put down my Fibonacci retracements just like I was the other day. And because this is a daily chart, I'm going to set it from 0 to a multiple of 10. In this case, I'm going to use 10 billion. Oh, that's billion. There we go. Okay. So 50% being hit. That's a clue to you that if this thing is set to $10 per degree, and we're defining a lot of moments here, and it's within the 9 rings of 360 degrees of this setting of $10 per degree, you know that this level that it's hitting in here, although generally the market fits perfectly within this structure of $10 per degree, at this moment, as the volume breaks above, especially on average, if I were to move at a moving average, okay, you've got here a break of the 38.2 and maybe a touching of the 50% level. And that to me tells me that we could be moving easily from $10 per degree to 20 or even $50 per degree just to define this one moment. Now, I know that might be weird for somebody who's using this stuff with my other method of planetary lines. You might be creating a relationship of $1 per degree with this level of 10%, and this level of 20% being $2 per degree, and this level of 50% being $5 per degree. But when we're dividing a wheel, which actually is stacked one full cycle of 360 degrees. Our full cycle of 360 degrees is our focus when we're relating it to the 1 by 1 here. And so because we have to relate it to a 1 by 1 that is now broken into this sort of, what would you call this, this pyramided form where, you know, there's a relationship of 360 stacked degrees actually increasing in size over time, you've got to, you know, basically understand that this relationship, it's sort of a fractional one compared to the one of a 360 degree full ephemeris. This is a broken down version of the ephemeris. Therefore, our relationship to our 1 by 1s is also broken down. So we're just multiplying by 10. It's a simple solution. Okay, but the multiple harmonics that are shown by the square of 9 need to be multiplied out by 10 in order to see it at this current price level and this current volume level. We might zoom in to $1 per degree on an hourly chart with this. Okay, but let's get a little further here. So as we have our transits, okay, we're looking for a position of Venus, which is technically here, right? This 1 by 1 moving through, can I make that thick? Well, technically, this point here, crossing 360 and moving up to here at 360 is the position of heliocentric Venus. And we're looking for a connection to that level as the price relates, as the Venus makes a connection to natal Uranus. You're looking for connection to the transiting Venus and connection to the positions of the natal planets, 138 being natal Uranus. So this is transiting heliocentric Venus, making connections to natal Uranus's position within the square of 9. So let me just actually, well, this is actually not the 1 by 1. We're looking here 0 to 360. So this line here, this more horizontal line, right? That's the conjunction. But look at how the price, once it does correct and it moves 180 degrees back down, it moves literally back and is at 138 degrees of this exact point. Now, let's take a look here. At $10 per degree, we are in the 9th row, okay? And if we're coming into a natal conjunction with a transiting planet, well, we're looking towards the position of Venus versus where we are in the square, sorry, the position of Uranus that the transiting planet is making we're looking for transiting Venus to make a relationship in the square to the actual position, also in which ring it is in. And so if up here, by the time the price gets here, right, the price is up in the top ring, right, 371. This is the last ring, technically even in the next ring up, in our 10th ring up, approaching 371. And so what this is showing us is the actual price is 1, 2, 3, 4 rings down from the actual position of natal Uranus. And so to correct upwards and move above, well, it's possible, but it would require a break of a level we know is difficult to break, right? This 360 degree level, which we did get basically monumental volume that has never happened before and possibly broke us into a new level of geometry here. But without getting that same amount of volume or more as we break over 360 degrees, I would say that that's a major point of resistance that we're not going to break until you see that. So maybe a reapproaching a volume towards the 50% or even 75% level. And, you know, when cycles come together, that's when you see the most volume. And so you could see that kind of thing coming in around the time of the in the end of the year, we have a bunch of big astrological moments coming in, which I'll talk about. But just looking here, what we're looking for is the connection to the position of Venus as it travels and the positions of the prices of Uranus positions, right? This 138, the 80 degrees. So at the conjunction, 81 degrees is hit. Also 138 degrees, basically creates a really bullish movement right back to that level, falls back to 80 degrees, finds a low there, gaps up to 138 degrees and moves on from there. What speed is it moving at? Well, this is the 1x1 of heliocentric Venus. And you can see that it's moving a little bit faster than that. It's moving kind of in between this channel here, right? And you can see that on the day of the square, we're looking at a connection to this other channel here within our Gann box, relatable again to the level of heliocentric Venus crossing 90 degrees, making a 90-degree relationship to Uranus. So the price is also reflected in the harmonic, relatable basically to transiting Venus at a slightly different speed here through the box. Okay. And what's going on? Well, why is it a different speed? Why isn't it sticking on the 1x1 and falling to the natal position? Or why isn't it moving up and continue on like it did here? Well, look at the lull in volume. Okay, and you might have to collapse your geometry here in order to see that. But also by adding harmonics, you don't need to collapse that geometry. You could just say to yourself, here we are at about 50%, and we're moving down now towards about 20%, which would be our next level down that we'd be concerned about. Okay, we're not quite there, but low volume wouldn't allow us to break through these levels. So our first target as we hit this aspect is the closest level of harmonic that is there for us, which is right here. This is relatable again to the cycle of heliocentric Venus through B square of 9. Okay. But it's relatable to this slightly different harmonic because the actual volume didn't push it hard enough to get to here, which would be, you know, more relatable to the volume that we were seeing here. It's a relative relationship. It's broken down. You can see the moments. We talked about volume a little more in depthly previously, and I will more about volume again tomorrow. We'll get really in depth. But you can see here, this connection here, 38.2, the moment is also kind of a high here in a major correction if you were trading daily S&P, right? But that's happening here in the middle of the cycle. That's when Venus is crossing the 180-degree mark of the square, and we're crossing and we're moving down to the 180-degree movement. And then we're also moving down here to what is basically the 1x1, but it doesn't quite make it because of low volume. And then we move up, we get an increase in volume again. Well, where is that next harmonic up? We're looking for a connection within the box to this 80-degree mark. We find that little bit of volume increase enough to maybe break over this 360 degrees. We continue up. It's not negative that it's a square. It's the changing moment, and it actually pulls us, the price, not us. Here we are, square. Now let's look here. Let's look at this. Look at the position of Venus here. Let's look at the position of natal Uranus. Notice that on the square in this ring, they are biquintile, right? This is basically 144 degrees from natal position within this square circle. Where does it go? It literally moves from 260 degrees, which is basically just around here, okay? At that moment that the Venus hits 72 degrees or biquintile to natal position of heliocentric Uranus. Let me just show that movement. Sorry, here we go. It's at 220, 221, right there. It touches, right? 221, it's basically the exact low. And from that moment, it jumps the price from where it is, which is just below 260 degrees, which is right here. It moves to 270 probably, right? Just about Here, let's see 270. I don't know why 260 is labeled. 270. Perfect. After that one little drop, it moves to 270 basically. Okay. Oh, we're looking at, sorry, we're looking at the outer ring here. So 270, it falls here, basically, just below 270. Well, you know, there's Venus, there's Uranus. You know that that's basically around opposite Uranus. You're looking at the position of Venus here, and we basically jet from this moment, from the price range between 260 and 290. This would be our low area to be buying. We're looking for a rebound towards the actual position of natal Uranus, and it jets upwards. It's above 180 degrees of this box, which means the lower targets are not really in mind yet. If we saw this movement down much more bearish, the lower targets would be there. But upwards, you can see, moves right to the position of natal Uranus within the square on the trine. And we can sort of see the movement on there, on this wheel, by watching the position of actual heliocentric Venus come up, cross here. That's the moment it crosses 0 degrees, right? Well, look at here. Look at where we are in price. 0 degrees, 360 degrees. That's the moment the price breaks upwards over and up to the natal position. So again, we're dealing with this sort of dealing with the ephemeris on the right and watching the planets move around. And that's why Optima is very, you know, handy for all of this, obviously. But you could be doing this manually. This is day-to-day work. This is not, you know, I'm jumping in time and space here, but you know that basically we're dealing with, you know, large amounts of time. If we're dealing with a couple weeks, you're only plotting things a few times a day, maybe. Maybe you spend an hour a day charting. I mean, it's nothing more than that. I'm doing a lot here, right? So here we have this trine, and we have this position now of Venus coming up to about 120, right? 125 degrees. Well, here is the price. There's 138 degrees, which is the position of natal Uranus relative to the inner box. And it falls basically at that moment. Here we have the connection to that 80-degree position, which is here. That's the actual position. And it falls to 360, right? Bounces and moves up, and now it's in this new paradigm. Because why? Well, because Venus crossed over this point in the box, right? Crossed over this right there. Okay. And that spurred the moment to move upwards further. It could have corrected down there, and it would do this kind of movement in this lower box where it connects to lower versions of heliocentric Uranus and Venus. But instead it moved up because it was a good moment with this connection here, right? This moment here where it actually broke upwards. We did it with the price as well as with heliocentric Venus. And so the price is right there actually by chance. But, you know, also it moves up and finds its place here at about 138 degrees. We can do that. Place our price here on our wheel at 138 degrees. 138. So over here, right, at this corner, right? Where do we find? Here we are moving, and at that moment there, we're looking for the price. You know, it's basically, this is 135 degrees. Here we have 138 degrees, so it's about the same point, right? On this outer wheel. And at that moment that that relationship is occurring with price, it's also occurring with the trine here, right? That's the position of Venus with the price at 138 degrees on this outer ring. And at that moment, it falls down. And then we can continue on. It makes that another position. It makes an opposition here, and it goes up towards the natal position of Uranus again. And it kind of does this over and over. But look, as we kind of get and drift out here, it doesn't happen. We don't get that dip. Well, look at the volume tapering off, below 20% even at times here. That means that it's going to find resistance in tinier and tinier places. It's going to find resistance at the level of geometry within the box that it just cannot break because it's relatable to the larger size of geometry that it was breaking previously with a different speed of the market. Now, recently we had a little break upwards and we fell. Let's take a look at that. Let's just go here and I'll take copy tool. Actually, I can just do this and say time flip. There we go. So that's my next box over. It should be set perfectly, but it won't be because of trading days and calendar days this is set to. So I'm just going to pull the box. Oops. Just want to be proportionally correct to Venus crossing 0 degrees. It's not going to give me that. Oh, I can only move it from this side of the box. Okay. So just doing it manually then, putting it down, drawing it over, and placing it where Venus crosses 0 degrees again there. Okay. Now, let's just also, without looking at the relationship, since we're in this close and we're kind of looking at tight relationships, and yeah, we found a relationship in price to the natal position as it crossed, just like we did with the natal positions in price on the 360-degree wheel in the previous webinars, 2980. 3710. Right. So that's pretty much perfect. Now let's just get rid of these for now, these natal transits. And truly, we could just ignore, just ignore the 138 and the 80 just for now. What I want to see now, just like we did with the bigger cycles, let's actually go to here, and let's just move back here. And as we enter this box, we know that it's crossing 0 degrees. So let's do our standard also marking off of these degrees. Okay. And actually, what I can do is I can just take. We don't have to deal with 9 and 11 and 28 because you know that those are going to be very tight. So let's just take, the outer rings. Once we get to about 28 degrees, that's 28 degrees right there. Let's mark it off. Take my vertical line, VL, place it down right there. And we'll place we'll make a bright green line since it's Venus, make it a little thicker and set the date. And then we can move on, copy this tool and, copy it yet, just move on and let's get the next moment it hits 53, right? Right about there. Okay. Right. Copy tool. We'll move on. This is Venus hitting 86 degrees. Heliocentric Venus hitting 86 degrees, which is 0 degrees of the square of 9. Pretty big move there. Move on again. All the way around 128. Look at that pacing here, the way that these turns and these swings, as they grow and they change in their relative size to each other, they're doing it basically proportional to heliocentric Venus. Let's keep going. Our next ring of 360 degrees, 177. Well, we get a high. Let's mark that time. Copy tool. Now you know that Optima has an automatic tool to mark these spots. Okay, it's called time by planetary degrees. If you're using it, you can use that. Okay, but if you're not doing that, this is just as easy. Copy tool. If you were using this, you would mark off where Venus is. You would find out the date when it would be at this degree on your ephemeris at 127 degrees heliocentric, and then you would mark off that date on your wheel here. So up to 232 breakout. That's also that moment, right? We already talked about 232, 233. That's that moment, all right? So let's get that up there. Just seeing these kinds of things, I think, fully built, somebody taking their time and showing you rather than rushing through one simple example. I'm showing you multiple examples of basically the same thing, but in a sense, seeing it now, the different kind of relationships that you can create between planets, not using any special formula or any kind of real astrological understanding, just using what's available to you, the aspects that day. Okay, here's the last movement here. And then another breakout. Copy this tool, place it down. Let's move the ephemeris to now. When does it hit? Another major moment. Let's see. Let's see 28 degrees again. Right. That's what we checked before. That was 28. That's 53 there. So 28 was about here. 28 was about there. Okay. Mark that off, because you realize now, look at how this cycle is working. See how the cycles get sort of squished back in? They expand out and then they squish back in. That's sort of important too, because it kind of tells you about how these cycles expand and how, these segments and these breakouts will occur in relationship to each other, but over an expanding amount of time. And then after a certain moment, they start to shrink again. And actually, they shrink back to where they were at the beginning of the cycle drastically and immediately rather than gradually and backwards. It's sort of important. It creates, some big moments. And look at the spike that occurs here. Perfectly relatable to the geometry of the harmonic here. Relatable to the box that's just set perfectly to heliocentric Venus moving through this entire structure. In a sense, moving all the way around this ephemeris one time. And so this is the combo of two planets. So we defined long-term structures with the SPX, or sorry, the S&P, with Uranus, and then we dug in a little deeper within this movement here, which is relatable to Venus transiting natal Uranus. And yes, we could look at the transiting aspects, but we could also just look at the relationship of the natal position and also just the position of Uranus and Venus within here. Let's just do one more thing though. Because this is such a big move, and like I was saying, the potential of it moving up to a higher level of ratio, well, let's just do that. Let's just come here, and what I'm going to do on my layers is I'm going to name this layer that's visible right now. Where is that visible layer? Here we go, up at the top. Actually, this is this price. This is that. Sorry, I'm just locating my work. Here we go. So this whole, all of what I've drawn on here, it's relatable to $10 per degree. We know that, right? We know that it's based on $10 per degree. So the square of 9 is $10 per degree. We know that the relationships of the planets then are $10 per degree. And if we were to draw that natal fan, we would set it to the $10 per degree conversion. But let's see the bigger ratio. So let's just take this layer. In Optima, I could just take it and duplicate it, clone it. So now I'm going to get 2 layers of the exact same thing. I'm going to save this just in case. And now I've got a secondary layer. So I'm going to name the other layer $10 per degree. That way I can always see it. And I'm just going to take the second layer, and I'm going to change my square of 9 to be $100 per degree. You know that we're in the 3rd revolution here, basically. Let's see. Yeah. So there's 1, 2, and 3 revolutions, and we're out basically sitting at that 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. That's the position of natal Uranus at this higher level. That outer natal Uranus, 80 degrees. So let's take a look at this. If I were to take my static and change it to $100 per degree, then all these boxes need to change too. So let's just actually get rid of, let's knock back, first of all, this dynamic GAN-FAN, because that dynamic GAN-FAN was set to the higher level. We can actually bring this down. So write the trend line here. The trend line here is giving us the position, that number 9810, right? That's the amount of degrees that heliocentric Uranus has traveled since birth. And so we're looking at a trend line here that's set to times 10, where it's set from 0 degrees at birth to 9810, you know, that multiple of 10, that 981 times 10. So let's just get our higher level geometry as well. It would be really high up actually. So realistically at this point, there's no point in seeing it. But if you were doing this and it would actually affect, if it wasn't that $98,000, if the level up geometry was there, you'd also want to set that fan. Okay, but it's not going to affect us. We know that we're basically within the very bottom of this bigger structure. And if you look here, this position here on this day of actual Uranus, well, let's take a look at that. If we're here, that's our 11, right? There's our 11. And then we have up one 360-degree level is 2,800 at $100 per degree, right? 28. That's exactly the position today of heliocentric Venus. Okay. And then we're coming here. So basically what I'm looking for is this idea that, you know, if we're right here at 138 degrees, that's heliocentric Uranus natal position. Well, technically, we're down here with Uranus at $100 per degree, which is actually sitting at where? 37 degrees, 36, 37. Well, let's put back on that degrees of Uranus. Look at that. At this moment, when the price of the SPX was over here at 35.10, and it kind of shot upwards at that very last spike upwards recently, that was the moment that, you know, or not the moment, but that was when basically right here, you can see that at that moment, Uranus switches degree from 37 to 38 degrees. And so it's a major change in its relationship to the natal position, but also its position in price at $100 per degree is moving beyond $3,700 where we are, right? And, you know, that basically tells you that truly, you know, we're moving up still at the position really with actual position of Uranus through the bigger structure of the rings. And if we look back a little bit, I'm just gonna knock off these degree counting again, just to be more visual. Oops. Let's look at that date again back here when Uranus crossed 0 degrees. We jetted upwards, right? So since here at about, right, 11, there's 11, right, down here, we've moved up with Uranus. Let's take a look. When does Uranus hit 11? Let's move up and move up and move up and move up. There's a Uranus hitting 1100 here. We're breaking here. We're hitting 1100. We're hitting 1100 with Uranus here. Well, breaking upwards, basically, finding a low, an exact low, basically. Let's take a look at that. Take a look at that. The transition. Actually, there's the transition to 11 right there. Okay. And now let's look away the transition from 11 to 12. There it is. So basically 11 being this entire period of time here, and then a breakout to levels that have never been seen before as we get to another ring of Uranus. And let's see the next time when Uranus gets to 28. And yeah, there are other turn dates there to watch for when Uranus hits the different parts. Look at that. We're way up here. Where's the price? 2,800. We're moving up sort of slowly with actual position of Uranus as after it crossed 360 degrees of this larger structure of $100 per degree. So the bigger structure is still playing out, and it helps us use the bigger planets and the bigger cycles. Okay, so look at that. You know, it's a major moment there. You have Venus crossing our 0 degrees, but also what's crossing here of our Uranus is crossing here. Let's see. Let's just get that back here. Where's that actual Uranus date? Oh, natal transits. There we go. Planetary angles. Here we have the actual transition here, that moment. So there's Venus crossing 0 degrees and hitting the center of the circle again. And then here we have the actual moment that Uranus changes another position and hits the corner of the box, 30 degrees from natal position, major change. Okay. But I think that you can see the overall price kind of leaning towards whatever Uranus is doing here, heliocentric Uranus. And let's move up a little bit more. Where's the midpoint there? You've got the, you know, that conjunction there in a sense with the position of natal Uranus. Major moment there. Pivot up into another high and then a movement down. And then continuing up until 35, getting a high. You know that there's a high coming here at 36, which is also relatable to the sort of the coming into the corner here of the box, which is natural resistance, and therefore we fall. The price falls. Now, I just wanted to reset these boxes though in this bigger structure of what is, you know, oh, sorry, this was $10. So this is now $100 per degree. And I just want to see a $100 per degree box. You might try 20, but let's just see what it looks like. We know that we've got a $100 per degree geometry setup. I can get rid of the other boxes just for now. I'm going to set this down to 28. We know that it's set properly in time to the cycle, and we know that these time cycles are still relevant to us. I just want to see the bigger structure and how it fits. So let's see our price range of 2,800, which is, you know, that 360 degree level. And then next level up is 5,300. All right. And now we have a bigger structure. You can see that there is some sort of connection here to the geometry that's been playing out, especially when the bigger moments in volume hit. You have interaction with the higher level of geometry. And let's just try the lower level box too. Let's just copy it. Paste it down one level of 360. And take this square, place it here. 360. You know, when you have this kind of geometry, you could add a circle, you could add an arc. However you see this one by one, this relationship here, you can add a circle if you'd like. Just, you know, once you have geometry down, you can start adding the different kinds of geometry. So if this is set to $100, I think what we can do is here, we can just set this concentric circle to be about as wide as the box, and then set it to 100, or it's not going to be 100, but let's see, I can just pop it down. I think 60, no, 20, okay, so 30, maybe 33, yeah, 32, it's about 32. It's just an irregular size because this box, this circle is relatable to, in this case, daily bars. And so it's being set to a Venus cycle, right? One heliocentric Venus cycle. We're taking it from the center and moving it out there. And this circle helps us to find some big movements, right? It helps us find arc resistance when we're finding support from the arcs and when we're finding resistance from those arcs. Okay. When we're above or below 180 degrees or 360 degrees, you can see that this is a level of 360. So technically, there's also a square right here. Oh, this is a square that's covering 2 full boxes. We could actually split that up, maybe go half that amount. So maybe it's about 16. Oops. Where's our levels here? So this is the level of 360, move up to 180. Okay. This is a bit crude now. I'm just doing a quick kind of laying of things. You could lay them more precisely. Just copying and pasting things, setting them inside the box. Let's take a zoom out here. Remember, I mean, the importance here is that this is all being drawn without any relationship to the price whatsoever. It seems complicated, and yeah, it's a lot of lines, and how do you deal with geometry? How do you trade this kind of thing? Well, there are targets within here. I showed you how you can be relating them to the planets crossing through all these structures, but also just finding support and resistance and geometric connections to these movements. You know, again, this is completely unrelated to the price movements. So let's get this, actually, this lower level circle needs to be shrunken down, needs to be a different factor because it's related to a smaller level of 360 degrees. So maybe go down to 12, 10. This is a tool, you know, I'm basically just setting the circle inside the square. How I set that circle, I mean, it's going to differ in different softwares, right? So all that's being said is the center of the circle to the edge of the circle. That's all this circle is being based on. And then I'm using a ratio as to how many dollars I'm relating this distance to. And then it's puffing it outwards, upwards, and putting it to that exact ratio. So I'm setting it inside this box, and you're getting some great support and resistance levels. Now, that's 9:30, so that is 3.5 hours. I'm going to go on, but I'm going to go through the next parts a little bit more quickly because you have the idea here. You're drawing it down, but the different versions of the way you draw it down don't really matter. You know, if I were to take a look here, let's go in here. If you were sort of the way that you draw it, what I mean is the different versions, meaning if you're going to use it for a different time frame, if you're going to use different cycles, it's always the same approach. If you're working on a daily chart, you might want to use a tighter time frame, therefore, or sorry, a tighter ratio than you're dealing with when you're looking at a monthly chart. Right? So maybe moving from the $100 per degree down to the $10 per degree would be more, you know, substantial for smaller movements. And get the smaller movements in there. Maybe you're going to be looking at this on a 4-hour chart instead. Right? So let's just take a look here, save it, close. And I'm going to take a quick look at Bitcoin. Here I've got a similar thing going on, but I'm using natal Jupiter this time. Okay, 299 degrees, natal Jupiter. Oh, sorry, in this case, it's heliocentric, so it's 302 degrees. Okay, let me just make sure of that. I'll put this to the natal date of 1/3/2009. Oops. And we set it to 6:15. Doesn't matter, 6:15 p.m. But just so you know that that is the natal date for Bitcoin if you don't know it already. And what I'm going to do, just take a look here. You can see that Jupiter is right there. Okay. Now let's just take a look just for fun. Look at this natal date here. You've got an alignment here of a square in the circle to Saturn. So the natal position of Jupiter and Saturn, although they're not square in real life, they're almost, you know, they're not really opposite. They're just, you know, they're apart on the ephemeris, but on the square of 9, they are square. Okay. And here we have Uranus and Jupiter. Well, that is a 240 degree harmonic. So this is a 270 degree harmonic, square, 90 degrees from natal Jupiter. And this is a 240 degree harmonic, 120 degrees from natal Jupiter. And look at Pluto here, basically square as well, basically opposite. And here you get Neptune is a little bit off, okay, but also quite aligned to basically the edge of the circle here. And you know, there's a whole set of geocentric planets to use. But what I'm looking at here is just that same kind of idea of zooming out and using your fans from that natal position. Hope you realize what I'm up to here, right? Taking my position of Jupiter, watching it hit 0 degrees of the fan. And let's see those moments. Let's see those moments in the past. Well, first of all, we've got here, that's that moment there where is it? There is Jupiter, and it's crossing in, that's 1 degree there. And we have this sort of first movement to a new level, right? A breakout for the first time. And this is way back, right? And we continue on. These are all the moments that you can see are significant to Jupiter crossing this line here, this 0 degree of the circle, sorry, of the, well, the circle, the outer circle, counting the degrees of these rings. And so let's move on. Here's Jupiter here. You can kind of see, basically, you'll get a sort of fractal every time this occurs. You can see here a depression in the market afterwards. You can see here a depression in the market afterwards. Now, sometimes you get the exact opposite, but you can kind of see a fractal, a reverse relationship once it crosses, okay? Now, this is going to have to do, again, with the relationship to the prices that you see and the natal positions and the levels of 360 that you're within. You can look at those kinds of things, but I just wanted to see how well it also works on Bitcoin, and just noticing, again, there's a major cycle, a major boom, and when does it end? As Jupiter crosses this position of 86. And well, you know, where's $86? Way up here, right? 86 bucks is right about here. We get a crash downwards towards $86. It's not exact, but it's a good way to look at it. Okay. Oops. I moved my line there. So that's that moment exactly right there, right where this line is. That was the top, in a sense, based on Jupiter hitting the 0 degree line. And again, a depression. And let's move here. Another depression after a bubble cycle. Another depression into the bubble cycle. And here we have that alternate spike upward again. Okay. Now we can see ourselves also within our 360 degrees. Well, where is this? Let's see this 159. What am I doing here with this one? I think that's not really what I need. I need here, what I need is 40 degrees. And I need, sorry, not 40 degrees, 24 degrees, which would be the outer circle position of natal Jupiter. And I want to see 302. So let's put those in. 23 degrees. I need to make that blue. Whoops. 23 blue. Okay. And we also wanted to add the position of natal Jupiter, which is 302. Oh, I need 360. Make it blue as well. Make it thick. Make this one thick. And so those are those extra positions. You're looking for a connection to those positions when we land on that timing, right? And look at that. You're seeing a very good connection here. Why did it go up? Well, yeah, it could have gone down to this 23 degrees here. The price was, I mean, I think that honestly, the low of some exchanges definitely hit 55 here. If it didn't, it got a little closer than maybe on the weekend. I think this is not showing weekends, this is historical data. Okay. So 5,500 here is not impossible. It got down to 58 on this exchange or this index. Still a nice number within 360 degrees, within $8,600 to $5,300. You were looking for $5,500, and it basically hit $300 from there and then launched upwards. So it was pretty good, not perfect. We're looking again, this is long term. you're looking here, you get this aspect when Jupiter crosses 0 degrees. Where does it go? Up to 302 degrees, natal Jupiter. Right? Perfect. Come out here. Now what I've done is, just for extra information, what if I take that, like I said before, you could take that entire portion. This is now 360 degrees of natal Jupiter, oh sorry, of transiting heliocentric Jupiter going around this ring here, making in relationships. It's going to hit heliocentric Saturn at some point in the future here for the conjunction. But we're going to move here just to see, well, this here is coming up at 13%. Well, look, it's the corner of our square, right? So as we get through here, we're going to look at 360 degrees of Jupiter, where it goes all the way around one single ring, but broken up into our standard proportions. But we know that these proportions are actually degrees. 50% is actually 180 degrees, 33% is 120 degrees, 66% is 240 degrees. I mean, look at these turns. They're just incredible, perfect, right? And you're getting this idea that, well, at this moment, it can move up or down, but the price is above 180 degrees, and natal Jupiter is at 382 degrees. You get the transit and it hits. This area in here might have been moving at a little bit slower speed. You might have to deal with ratio change on Bitcoin, especially when it's jumping huge in value. But look at these support levels, right? You know, the fact that this index is showing that Bitcoin hit 4K as its low, and I've seen a lot of indexes listing 4K as its low. It's kind of interesting to me because 4K is such a perfect square of 9 number. Where's that low coming in there? Really, what's that listing that low as? 3966. Okay, so not quite 4K, but also knowing that BitMEX hit 3600. There's all kinds of reasons why Bitcoin has all these different numbers there, but well, the fact that the index shows you that perfect 4K or close, I mean, that's pretty interesting to me. But generally, look at the turn dates. Look at the connection to then, once you're on the turn date, where is natal position of that planet? And where is it within price of that 360 degrees that you're in? And are you above 180 degrees, which is your more likely target when that price hits? Is it more likely to move down or to move up based on this movement? Well, sitting on 180 degrees, very hard to tell what's going on. But potentially also within this small section, again, tiny little bit of volume. Let's just take a look. Oh, I'm not getting volume information on this. Let's just move over to a different index. It's the same thing, not going to make a difference. Let's move over back to what we were looking at here. And you can see that after the wave of volume here, first of all, here we have some of our lowest volume since all-time high, and then you had basically the same amount of volume over here. And so the market's barely moving here, and the market's barely moving there. Low volume, meaning basically $100 per degree. No, you're going to have that $10 per degree set up, and you're going to see that lower level. And again, like, you know, I'm showing you with this circle how you can follow and monitor the connection to the positions of Jupiter crossing through. You can also connect it to the positions of natal Jupiter. Right here, right? You can make it. This is now a position right there where Jupiter is exactly 30 degrees in its ring to natal Jupiter. And it's on a major move. Then we can see in the next 45 degrees. There we are at a major sort of high after a low of this Jupiter transiting. Then let's transit more to natal Jupiter. This is a perfect 45 degree, sorry, a perfect 60 degree. Okay. And then we move on. So you're getting these really good turns still. There's your 72 degree. Where is it? Where's that exact moment that it hits 250 over there? And then the moment that it moves away from 250, right there. So this whole little smudge upwards is definitely related to this 250 degrees where Jupiter is hitting 250 degrees. Okay. We might see it being relatable in price by being either exactly opposite in price to Jupiter. So let's see, where does it hit? It hits up here at just over 180 degrees, between 180 and 270 degrees. So of the circle, outer circle here, we're hitting, you know, about maybe 190 to 200 degrees, even more, right? So there's your 200 degrees. And if we have natal Jupiter here, you can take our selection tool, select natal Jupiter, and see maybe in this ring, 260 degrees. Sorry, 284 degrees. Well, we know that that's way up here, okay? And so we could look at the square, and that would be 180 degrees. And so basically we're on the square of where Jupiter is, right? Or sorry, 180. So square of that would be just below 180. And actually that's where the price does fall. So what's going on is there's a connection between price and the position of this planet within this ring of 360 degrees as it passes through. And we did show this position also, right? We also showed this position last time. We showed the position of the outer structure of time with heliocentric Venus in the last, but in that previous, the first chart I showed you with the Nifty, we added not just, we didn't add the outer lines of the position, we added the position within this small level of 360 degrees. So if I come here and I see this is the moment that Jupiter crossed 233 degrees, that's also a moment when it crosses 0 degrees. So I could just take the trend line, place it here. You know, this is that level that we're now in. And then I would move it across to the next point, which is here, 360 degrees. That means that it moved 360 degrees around this single circle from here. So if I watch this from here, this position, this red line is literally Jupiter's position, heliocentric, moving around. There it is, making a conjunction technically, and the same point to 23 degrees, right? That's that connection to natal Jupiter, heliocentric. And then we continue on all the way around. It's moving up. We're literally following it to this point here. And look at that. Up here, by the end of the year, we're going to be dealing with, well, this is already in October, that they're 1 degree orb from all of this nonsense that's going to be happening here, where Jupiter and Saturn are all closing in on natal position of Bitcoin's heliocentric Jupiter. So let's look up here. I think you'll see that as much as you can do this kind of thing with standard 360 degree levels that are not expanding, I think that you're seeing that the reason that this kind of expansion that occurs where we see Bitcoin and other kinds of markets growing logarithmically and not, you know, basically making these parabolic movements. Well, this is much better at defining than just standard planetary lines. The growth pattern that occurs, the level of prices that highs and lows hit within this level expands as it moves out in the same relationship to the planets, okay? And you can set these up infinitely into the future, and they have nothing to do with price other than the relationship of price unit. And just to prove the point a little further, we'll zoom in on a moon chart. We'll look at a small time frame, and you'll see that this can basically just be applied the same logic constantly to everything. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to move down. I got a request to look at Theta coin. It's an interesting coin. Don't know much about it. Now look at this interesting stuff here, okay? I'm on a 4-minute chart, all right? And again, I pre-prepared it because I didn't want to go through too much, but I will explain it, okay? We've got here, look at this volume. Crazy, right? Very consistent. It's basically sitting between our 100% level and our basically what could be considered a 200% level, or it's the 20% level of the higher structure. Sorry. And it's so consistent. So that tells me that on a 4-minute chart, although we are basically going possibly from something relatable to a 0.000, a large amount of zeros, to 0.5, up to even 2 and a relative or average volume of 1, it stays relatively the same over long periods on an intraday level. So I'm just going to take a look at this. Let's take a look at our settings here. What if I go to 0.0001? All right. And so that is 1/1000th. And you know that, I mean, if I go to 9, I'm way down there, right? We're way out of the price range. So we know that that's not the one. For our bigger structures, we go to 0.001 and we set it to 9. You can see that basically this level has become very important. It broke over it recently. When did it break over it? Well, there's this thing going on here. We have lots of these streaks. Well, what this is we're taking that same information that we were doing with the planets, but instead I'm going to use the moon. All right. And again, this isn't using any kind of natal information. This is just about the actual position of the moon. But if you added natal positions of planets within this structure, you may be able to get sorry, some really cool information. So let's just take a look here. So let's look at the moon. Look at the moon there. I got the sun there. First of all, what's this? Oh, we've got here our moon crossing right there. Oh, sorry, move so fast. So there we go. That's our 0-degree mark. So what I've done here is I've got some trend lines set up. Let's get rid of them for now. Let's take this one. And what I've done is I've set it up to go from when the moon is at 0 degrees or at 1 degree, you know, when it makes that transition, I'm placing it there. And then I'm placing it the next time the moon crosses that same position, does a full 360-degree lunar cycle, right? So that's that line. It's a different line. It's not the line of it crossing each one of these. I might want to see the moon when it crosses 2, 11, 28, 53. You know, I want to see those moments too, a vertical line. So let's do that. BL. That's that moment there. When the moon crosses to 360 and then to 0. Now you realize that basically you just watch this go around. Let's mark off 11 is a little bit too fast. Let's see 28. Okay, there's some major change to mark off. Vertical line, major change. Right? It's kind of moving up with the moon now, right? But it moves immediately much faster. And that's because, well, we are getting a little bit of an increase in volume here, but the market just starts moving quicker because it does break over. First of all, we get the little bit of increase over probably what would be considered the 1, right? Because it's going up to the 2 here, the 10 to the 20%. Technically, we could just see that. Let's see what that looks like. Put a 2 there. Let's see that cycle. First of all, let's take this position of the moon, copy it, put it to this position. Let's put it here. We know that that was the moment that it crossed 0 degrees on that other geometry of 1. Well, now we're at a geometry of 2, and I want to go up and find that moment there in the future when it crosses 0 degrees on this other geometry here. I'm being a little rough here, but I think you understand why. That's that moment there when the moon crosses. Okay. Well, look at that separate geometry, right? It started to move a little quicker here rather than $1, or sorry, 1/100th of a cent, or whatever this is, 1/100th of a dollar. 0.001, we move to 0.002, and we get a great connection to this. You know, let's move up, and I can just copy this now that I've got it, put it here, and put it up. And let's look at again, let's just watch the moon crossing through. So let's just get all those 0 degree points. 53, there's the moon crossing 53 right there. some amazing things going on in altcoins. To be honest, the way that they stick to cycles, I really don't trade altcoins too much, but they really have some amazing things to look at. Oh, copy. Sorry, just move on to the next one. We're in 86. Nice moment there. Kind of a cooling off of the market. Kind of got a little bit above the moon. Whoops. Copy tool. Got above the moon, and now we're moving back down. Might have fluctuated back down to a lower level of volume here. And maybe we're dealing with this $2 or sorry, 0.002 is too big. You can kind of go back to 0.001 and also add those upper lines, right? Just for this moment, let's see where the moon is. Copy tool. We know that it's crossing 0 degrees. Oops. There, right? So let's just take the less steep line that's now connected to the 0.001 per degree. Put it to this level. That's the slower moon. Connect it to the slower one to the 360-degree level of the upper level. You can see that basically that geometry, first of all, when it crosses, you get a big influx to that moment. It's like the two factors or ratios working out perfectly together. And what you're seeing is when there's the lull in volume and it moves back down to 0.001, the 10% in volume on average, you're seeing the connection to that moon and that lower level geometry. And where is it? Well, the moon is crossing basically 180 degrees right there. We crash down back to the moon to about 180 degrees. Then we're moving here, and look, that's where the two geometries cross. We get a big influx. Let's move here. Right. So adding the natal planets would give you a bigger story here, but let's just continue on to giving our 127. Right. We actually have our relationship to natal Jupiter we could be making, or we could also be making relationships to the sun. Just like the moon and the sun are usually making relationships to each other always with the full moon cycle, the phases. Here's our 127, another big change there. The moon hitting the 0 degrees of the square, okay. Moving back up to the moon. Now moving over again, 360 degrees, it's expanding in the time, right? 176. Well, look at that moment there. It's pretty interesting that we spike over 360 degrees there. It's basically the breakout moment. The low that comes in just before the breakout is right, let's see, right as it leaves, it's 177 there. That's the 0 degree break, and that's exactly when it breaks 0 degrees there. But it falls back down, okay? And that might be because of a transit that it makes or an aspect. But we're not getting that full story yet. We're just looking at these turns. So let's put our time there. Let's put our vertical line there. Let's take our timing, go around one more time. Even maybe we're going too far into the future now. Let's see. Oh no. Where's our next moment is 233. Great, great moment there. High on the moon, right? Coming down. Broke over there. When did it break over? Let's see. Well, right at the corner here, right? When the moon is crossing over from 180 degrees, comes up around immediately, breaking over 270. And right as the moon is here, we're looking at it to wait for it to cross the 0 degree mark again. Okay. And where is that? It's when you can see that the price is on the moon at that moment, right? 233. Breakdown basically afterwards. You know that this is set right now to, this is the higher level of geometry. I would definitely be looking up at this at there. So here we get that moment, 233, prices at 233 as well. Up in this highest moment, seeing an influx in volume, but I mean, volume isn't too readable here, but we did hit 20%, 20%, 20%. So, you know, at least being prepared for both possibilities is recommended, let's say. You can see it just falls down to 360 and bounces back up, basically back up to 233 immediately. Okay, there's 240 just below. Right. Let's get the next time it goes around and hits 299 there. Oh, another breakout. So I think that probably proves the point enough, guys. I lost basically everybody here. It was really long, but I wanted to get through all of this. Wanted to prove to you that it works on many, many different levels. It works on many different time frames. Okay. If you want to see the daily for theta, it so just fits within this one ring. So, you know, these weird altcoins, but when you get down to the details, you can still use the square of 9 and the planetary lines, which aren't really planetary lines at this point. They are square of 9 intervals of planets. And it worked really well for trend information, where you're going to find harmonic information. When the moon makes relationships to the natal positions, you might also find the same kind of things that we were finding on those larger charts, on the longer term charts. Okay, guys, I think that is it for today. I know that that was really long, and I thank you for sitting through it if you did. I don't know if anybody's there. I don't think I've seen anybody make any moments of movement in the last while. If you're still there, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know. Hey, Dom, glad you're still there. I know that was a long one. Basically, what are we at? 10 p.m. here. So we've gone from 6 till 10. So that was 4 hours, as I thought. Okay, so that's good. I know it's a lot, this one, but I hope that what I did this time and spent the time doing more was showing you the multiple ways to use this sort of similar technique. Well, I'm not showing you a million techniques here. We focused mostly on heliocentric just because they're easy to draw. You're never going, when you're drawing a geocentric planet through here, it would be a little bit difficult because of the retrograde moments. You'll have to add a couple more lines to apply the slighter movements of the heliocentric geocentric movements, the up and down of the retrograde planets. But don't let that deter you. Draw a straight line and use it as an average. Okay, so if you want to deal with heliocentric, it's good for long-term analysis. It makes it simple. But you know that if we're looking here at the moon, well, this is geocentric right now. So really, you know, we're already back down to geocentric. Okay. So not only are we looking at the positions within the square, we're also looking at those relationships to the positions of the natal planets in these angular relationships that you see here. A lot like fans and stuff being added to your chart. But this is something that, you know, is very special, this mathematical relationship, whether you're starting to figure out that there's probably a square root system in here of numbers that you can find, or a numerology system, which you can work out different numbers and different levels easily for yourself. But just looking at this, how simple it is to find a planet pass over these degrees and look for the sensitive moments and look for change, and then look for the planet or the price to do something very relatable to the price level of the planet. Quite simple, almost exactly the same stuff that we're doing when we're dealing with our other things, our other tools that I've been teaching you, our other ephemeris. But tomorrow takes this to a different place. Okay, takes these divisions and these kinds of things to a whole other place. Okay. Yeah, so I'm set to -4. If you're in, no, so if you are looking at transiting planets, yeah, so the natal date would be set to your own, no, sorry, the natal date is set to the location of the natal date, in a sense. So with most crypto, it's UTC time. And so this should be set to UTC time. Oh, well, let's see how much that makes a difference. There's our 0 degree passing. It's basically off by a couple degrees. So you're not getting the same exact turn moments before, like I noticed. Okay, well, I mean, they are still very similar moments. GMT offset is important though for trading with the moon. Worry about that. These things, there's a lot of settings, you know, kind of set these things up for you. I don't really, I mean, I use these things, not necessarily using it on this coin in this way, right? But yeah, so basically the idea is that if you're pulling natal dates, your natal date has also a location. And that location would be your time zone of your natal positions. When you are looking for transiting planets, you're looking at the position of the planets relative to the market. Again, so transiting planets set to UCT time as well for this theta coin. If you want to see theta coin, I believe it has I got my block here. Not important. Anyway, it has a natal date. I'll get the natal date for you if you need it. Okay. But basically, the idea is that you're always set to the market. So if the market is in New York, your planets are set to the market in New York. Now, it's a little bit anti-intuitive, but you realize that what you're seeing with the transiting planets is literally the planet at the time it was over the time zone of the market. Therefore, it's got to be from the perspective of the market, not you. Okay. You then got to convert your own time from the time of the market. If you're working with UTC time, you realize that that is a set time for you, but all your planets need to be set for UTC time to a market here. So I hope that helps. So you know that the little tiny things that I might have, you know, messed up in this long-winded explanation, it's the little details are a little bit difficult sometimes. That's why doing this manually is really difficult. But you're realizing that, you know, it's basically, I basically got almost the closest, very close moments here. It's almost a little bit more bullish now every time that this came in, or at least the change is a little more, well, it was a little better on that exact time zone before. But the turn times are not the most important thing, right? We're looking for a connection to price, but we are looking for turns as well. Okay. Let's look at this breakout that was so important before. 233. Well, that was the breakdown. That was a pretty perfect one. So the time zone really matters, but you know, being a little bit off, it's depending on how you trade. Obviously, if you're trading an actual 4 or, oh, this is a 15-minute chart. But if you were trading a 4-minute chart, you know, you'd be dealing with something completely different here. You'd be worrying about the more exact numbers, and if you're dealing with high leverage, you'd be worrying about more exactness. Okay, and I'd be laying more exact lines and zooming in a lot closer and seeing all of the details a lot better. Okay, so I'm going to end it there, guys. There's some big stuff going on coming up. So we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow at the end, because I think I'll have a little more time tomorrow. Just wanted to look back at this BTC though. If you are trading BTC, there is this moment coming in here to think about. It's a big moment coming in. Basically, that's that moment that Jupiter crosses 0 degrees. That was the last one over here. Where are we compared to natal Jupiter? Natal Jupiter is up there at 302. We're below 180 degrees. 23 degrees seems possible. If we get up above 10.6, maybe we're heading up towards 302 here, 11.9, around this date. So we can see where we're at and where the market might move. And if it does move, we've already got targets. And it's coming up this time. So anyway, hope this was great, guys. I hope you had a good time. This was very fun for me. I feel like I just took you on a space trip, but let me know if you have any questions, if you have any concerns. If this didn't make any sense to you, let me know. And I'll send out the recording as soon as I can. So guys, have a great evening or day. We'll talk soon. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, guys. All right. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, guys. Good night, everybody.